everyone. Coming to the Budget Committee meeting for January 6th, 2026. I didn't write that on the agenda. 6 o'clock here at the Opera House. Any announcements from anyone on the committee for, with regards to the budget process or anything? Okay, no new announcements. Any other agenda considerations or changes since this has been published?
Clay, do we need the minutes from the last meeting approved, or is it not necessary?
You know, that's a good question. I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yes, you should approve the minutes.
Yeah, normally those would be
Yep,
circulated and voted upon.
okay. I think we did circulate those minutes also. I don't know if everyone else got a chance to view the minutes. They did get passed around one of the emails. But I'll follow up with that after, and we may have to vote on that at the next meeting. I don't know if everyone has time to view them. Any other agenda considerations, changes? Okay, moving on. Any public comment? We've got a decent turnout tonight. Any other questions from the public that have showed up tonight? Yes, sir.
Mic I can use?
Yeah, Kilda right there. Sure.
Yeah, why don't you just come up, the table right up here, right in the open spot.
You're right close.
Have a seat.
Get friendly.
No, sit. Okay. I'll only be a minute, but.
No, that's all right. Go ahead.
Just so it's not weird.
Steve apparently has two. Hey, yeah, if you were to move, scoot down.
Yeah, that one's not lit, this one's not lit.
Yeah, it's not your first rodeo. No, you know you did. Thanks. So I have some comments.
Sure.
I'll just read them.
Yep.
Good evening, Chair Tolman and the rest of the Budget Committee. My name is Jeff Leclerc. I'm the Chair of the Planning Board here in Rockport. So at this committee's last meeting, there was a lot of discussion about gathering information from the town in order to fully understand why budgets have been increasing year over year. And I'll leave that research to you all, but I wanted to weigh in on an aspect that was mentioned in that meeting regarding town staff. So, although I believe it may be for illustrative purpose, there was particular focus placed on the planning office of the town of Rockport under the query of what do they do that's of value to the town. So, on behalf of the planning board, I can provide you with some insight on what the Office of Planning, Community, and Economic Development does from our interactions. So, thanks to this office and its staff's work, building permits are easy to obtain. Permitting is clear, not onerous, and if board approval is required, the planning board, the process is guided for both the board and the applicant by Director Thomas. Now, I, as the chair, would have a tough time if that applicant hadn't been prepared by somebody in the town office as to what to expect at that meeting. Thanks to the office and its staff, records are kept better than ever before, and that's notable in the meeting minutes that are kept and just the way that the overall office is being run, I think. Thanks to the office and its staff, our planning board is well prepared and advised when applications come to our review. Thanks to this office and its staff, Rockport has an excellent new comprehensive plan and continues to improve its land use ordinance. Thanks to the office and its staff, although it's underappreciated, Rockport is safer through diligent enforcement of building codes. Thanks to this office and its staff, the town has avoided costly liability because of their, the office's knowledge, professionalism, and how they've worked with town council. Thanks to this office and its staff, Rockport was out in front of other towns in the area in implementing ordinance changes that state mandated, such as LD 2003, LD 1829, and the like. Thanks to this office and its staff, the town has applied for and received numerous grants for improvements to its infrastructure, lessening burden on town taxpayers. And I will say these grants have not been trumpeted by the town enough, and they're going to provide future viability of the kind of development that this town sorely needs. Thanks to this office and its staff, finally, the tax burden placed on current property owners in Rockport is further lessened by the assistance provided to developers seeking to move to Rockport, effectively widening the tax base. And my hope is that my comments here tonight might stand in place of you're asking town staff themselves to testify on their own behalf. I hope you'll understand that the planning office not only makes Rockport more regionally competitive for development, but it serves Rockport's future economic vitality. On a personal note, it's been my pleasure in working with Orion, Ren, and Andrew while on the planning board, and I heartily endorse them as professionals and human beings. And finally, thank you to members of the Budget Committee for your volunteer service to our town.
Yeah, I think, first off, Jeff, thank you for coming up, providing comment. Any other questions or comments?
I just had a question. How long has that office been in existence?
Before I was on the select board 20 years ago. Yeah,
So it's been there for at least 20 years.
yeah, exactly. It's had different forms. There's been situations, going back 20 years, we had a full-time planner and an alternate code officer, a full-time code officer, and an assistant. That was 20 years ago. And it's, the office is sort of morphed over that time. In 2021, when I arrived, the town was in the middle of a contract with MCOG to provide economic development and planning services for the town, 3 days a week. And the assistant was a part-time position that was shared with the police department. So the numbers in the FY '21 era were on the low ebb of what that has been over sort of 20, 25 years.
I mean,
It's
who was
been existing.
Orion's predecessor?
So that would, there's been an.
It was a
let's see.
contract position.
Yeah, it was a contract position with MCOG, and Orion was the contractor who applied for the position when it was vacant, and he was ultimately the one hired. But we had two applicants at that time, so I think that position has been something that has ebbed and flowed, and it's in large part the conversation to move from the contract position to a full-time was in large part driven by what we evidenced through the hotel situation and the endless legal fees that we were bearing as a town, in part due to what I felt and I think others felt was a little bit of lack of needed attention towards that process. And I think the process that Jeff is experiencing with the planning board is really showing that we're putting people through those paces, making sure that the work that the planning board is taking on is well-based and well-evidenced and well-researched. And we have the work of the Zoning Board of Appeals has been pretty dry the last few years as a result of that. And I think that's evidence of that support.
I have no problem with what Orion's done. He's done a great job. I just wonder whether there's any kind of a cost analysis done before we start a new position.
That's a fair argument. The other part that I would add to that, Bill, is in terms of the cost benefit is the grants. And the grant, that's an ample part of that position, not only the oversight of the planning position. Thanks, I've got it right here too. So we've had $5.2 million that we've taken in over the last 4 years, which is not an insignificant sum. We're talking about an overall project budget of, for that department, $407,000. Now, does that have broader impacts in wastewater and other departments? Of course it does, but it allows us to play in a playing field that other communities are, and allowing us to be eligible in other federal and state grants that, when we were in a contract basis, we just simply weren't as a community. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Just quickly, this will be for the hearings to build that out. I mean, you've laid out those numbers. I mean, we can go back here and see that as recently as 2020, planning was costing us $177,000 a year. It's now up to $485,000 a year. So if you could show that, during the hearing, if you could show the growth of that over time, and then these grants over time to show that analysis, that's the analysis that I would like to see, because
Yeah.
you're making the argument that the addition of staff has brought in more, taking you to say it's brought in more resources than it's costing us. So I just need to see that, like, on paper.
Okay, sure.
That'd be helpful, thanks.
And just to, as a for instance, to give you a sense of the cost in that time of 21, 22, we were spending $68,000 for that contract with MCOG. we spent $26,000 for administrative assistant and $48,000 for the code enforcement officer. So to give you a sense, somewhere in the ballpark of $150,000, $160,000 is total outlay at that time.
And we're saying now it's at 400,000?
That was the total budget for the whole department, so that's not just, that's talking about paper goods and everything else under the sun, so it's a bigger number, but just in terms of what we're talking about for just what we were spending on that contract and the labor, it was about 160 at that time.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think one of the, just, I guess to reference or preface that, some of what came up last meeting was basically a development of looking at what our highest percentage and highest value growth line items were, and it's not necessarily an attack towards anyone, it's not a, even a, try to fight for your position or anything, it's just simply going off of paper and numbers that are on the paper to say, where do we need to look to see where we've increased our budget the fastest over the last 5 years, and that was the planning, the line item planning wages was just one of the higher ones. So again, that's just the background for anyone that is kind of tuning in. That's where that came from. So, all right, any other public comments? Okay, moving on to some of our discussion topics. Excuse me. Starting with town manager, thank you, John, for showing up tonight. Good to have you here. At least, obviously, last meeting, we generated quite a few questions, and it's, I think, probably a little more effective to just get you here and,
Yeah, little
one-on-one
pre-test.
instead. Yeah, yeah, there you go.
Test, right?
Yeah,
It's
at
always
least-
a good thing, it's always a good thing.
Yeah, at least
Taking
give you.
Steve back to his teaching days a little bit, maybe, I don't know, but, no, I'm glad to be here, and thank you for coming in here and working out the schedules, everything, so, thank you, appreciate
Yeah,
it.
yeah, sure. I guess to start off in the discussion topics, I'm assuming, with our actual, like, budget review, what did we actually call them last year? The budget schedule with our meetings, last year started like early to mid-March. I'm assuming we're still on track for that.
Yeah, still on track, so, you want me to just kinda talk about where we are?
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
okay.
sure, yep.
So, just real briefly, so all department budgets were due at the end of December. So those are now going in and they're being put into basically the master document that, for review. We're starting our first meetings with department heads this week. So I had hoped, if everyone had been healthy over the last 2 weeks, I would have been able to say, I think this is where we are, so I had hoped to have that, I don't. But what I can say is, so we're meeting the first round with our department heads this week. And that is a very cursory review of their budget, and trying to really get a sense of formatting, get a sense that some of the overall arching topics that were brought forward last year are addressed and there's support for them. So, some of this conversation we're talking about with how to present and how to best reflect, some of the questions that you all have. Now's the time for that. We're hitting it right on the mark. So we're doing well with that. The other thing that I would add, and I said this summer, and it's still true, the list and the items that were mentioned and discussed through last spring, those are still very front of mind. And though there hasn't been a work product, that's the hard part about this, is that we're talking about a work product that's going to come forward in 2 months, but these are items that were raised, late March. And really, it takes that much time for it to come back around and land on your plate. So I ask for a little bit of forgiveness of being able to, you can't really show the work because that's the schedule we're on. But I would say that the effort and the comments, both from the budget committee last year, this newer group, the select board, have been taken to heart and have been hammered home every department head meeting I've had. We have reworked our internal control policy. That changes a lot of how our department heads and how we as staff are reviewing our expenditures, our revenues. That's happening. And I want to give our department heads a lot of credit in really taking that process seriously. They're listening to what you're saying. They want as earnestly and as honestly as you all want to be able to bring forth the ability to do as much as they possibly can for as little as they possibly have to ask for it. And they feel that, and they say that, and I see it every day and how they're working. And I think that's important for you all to know. You know, again, where we were last year is where we were last year. There's a lot of things that went into that. But in terms of looking ahead to 2027, which is really what we're here for, right? Is we're talking about moving it forward and to say, what does 2027 look like? And I see, from what little I have seen, is a very positive picture that would make everyone in this room happy. Is there more work to be done? You better believe it. And I haven't, forget about my footprint. I haven't even put a thumbprint on what that looks like. So understand, you know, from my perspective, we're not there. I will just sort of off the top mention, health insurance did come in at 9%, which is it's a good number in one respect. It's much higher than inflation. We all know that. But in terms of what those of us who have been working in the private market and in the exchanges, 20, 30%, that's not what we're seeing in the municipal budget. So that's a very good thing. That's something that should give us all at least a little bit of some breather. Obviously, Walker's been involved and the task force. I won't get into that. I'm sure Walker can say much better than I. But I think we have some good news in that regard in relation to what we've seen around us. Secondly, so we've gone through the capital improvement plan. Obviously, many of you were part of that process. As those of you who were participating recall, very little in that effort was brought forward and will be brought forward into this budget. There have been a number of changes that will go into that, and largely it's on the equipment side to try to push out and to extend the length of replacement. And that's really a reflection of what is on the ground and what we're seeing. That's a good again, we're seeing trend lines that are good. I can't say it's 2.8%. I'm not here to say that to you tonight and make us all happy, but you know, I don't think that's anyone's looking for that tonight. But I do see I don't have the same anxiety I did a year ago, where I came to and say, I don't like this budget. I think this is a budget that we're gonna be able to work with. So in terms of process, we're still looking and angling to have that completed at the end of February for review. As soon as we can get that available so you can start to get your teeth into it, I'm glad to have that done. The issue we ran into last year is it required a couple rounds. We're trying to start those rounds of my work with department heads earlier. And last year we cut $2.6 million in that process. I'm hoping I don't have to cut that much from their request this year, but there will be cuts, and there'll be tough cuts. So again, I need time for that. I need to make sure they're reasoned and well-meaning. The last thing I just want to mention, and I don't think it wasn't on the agenda, but just to react to, there was a target raised by the board, or by the budget committee above 1%. And I heard it, I hear it, I'm gonna respect it. My sort of forethought is going to be to try to give a budget that is reflective of the current policies and the current activities of how's the town operating as of today. But I also want to provide an answer to your question, which is, what does 1% mean? I didn't see that as and correct me if I'm wrong from you all, and obviously I've got a select board also that I have to, as also part of this process. But I looked at that as, and I've heard from various members of the group here, I've looked at that as, that's a target, that's a place to sort of shoot for, and I'm glad to sort of respect that and try to show what that means, right? But I don't want to sort of give up from the idea of, okay, there's a delta there, right? And I think the delta is maybe where some of the conversation goes this March. And I think that's a healthy conversation to have. So I know there's been other conversations about maybe it should be less than 1%, maybe less, -20, I don't know. But my point is, I hear what you're saying, and if I understood sort of the intent of what the group's effort was, I want to sort of meet that, where you are and what you're hoping to accomplish. So as long as that makes sense to what you are saying, that's sort of my working theory as I go through the next couple months.
We were just looking at the percentage increases over the last 4 years,
Sure.
trying to average it out.
Yep. Understandable. Yeah. Right. And you didn't get to hear me complaining and moaning about how much I hated last year's budget. Some of the rest of your colleagues got a chance to hear that, Bill. But you're right. And there's a way of providing that. Now, ultimately, where all of you come down on that, that's for another day. But I look at my job here as to provide you options and provide the board options to make decisions. And however we get there, we get there. You're the elected body. I'm just the hired help here to try to make it work. So I appreciate it.
Jeff?
John, you had mentioned 2.6 million got pulled out of the budget. That was in the process of the initial
Yeah.
initial department head chairs to the eventual budget.
That was yes, that was
Last year, right.
last year's budget, right. So the initial department head requests were 2.6 million higher. We cut those down from what the budget that you all saw. Again, still at the end was still higher than any of us would be happy with, but I'm hopeful I don't have to cut as much because I think the message has come across pretty clearly, not just for myself, but from everyone who's been involved. We can't do this. We can't do this anymore.
So you're hoping to see the initial requests actually be less of
Yeah.
a scary number than they were
Yeah.
this time last year?
Yeah, and I'd also say this, I think where we are as a community right now, and I think the capital improvement plan was somewhat someone had that conversation in October, in that we're past the point on some issues. There are some looming issues that we need to really get our hands around as a community. Luckily, we have some time and that they're not gonna land in this budget document by and large, but they do require a great deal of time and consideration. You're not gonna deal with them all at once. You may not even be able to deal with all of them over the next 15 years. But they're present. The danger's present, and we need to be aware. That's all. So.
I think also I just have one comment on the 1%. I think, I'll at least speak for myself here. Even using the goal as the 1%, coming from my point of view, it wasn't to put pressure on you and the department heads to say, hey, you guys need to be at 1% coming into this either. I think some of it is going through the process. The budget committee as a whole wants to help figure out where to change spending so that we could get to 1%. It's still our goal to work as a somewhat united group to figure out where we can save money and where we can more affordably spend money. So I still like that you feel the pressure, that's good, but I don't want you to feel like we're just over here throwing rocks at you and waiting for you to come up with a budget that we like. We're just eager I am just eager to get the actual budget and see where we can help to have a conversation about all this stuff.
It's the hard part of it all. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, you all have been talking about budget for, 9 months, largely since we finished the work last year. Some of you a little bit later, but it's hard for a budget committee without a budget to talk about, right? So
Yeah.
I'm hoping to solve that problem for you in 2 months.
Yeah.
And give you something to really get your teeth into. But Bill's point is absolutely the right one. It's been a tough 4 years, and so we have to find a way. There was a lot. What was the phrase, Steve? It was unsustainable rate of increase, right? I think that was it. And that has to end. because we can't afford this. Now, there are other issues that have nothing to do with things that all of us, as well-intentioned as we all are in this room, that we can resolve. But we try to do the best we can with it. And I think that's what this effort, this spring is gonna be about.
John, you said you already have the budget heads, their budgets in
I
hand.
do, yeah.
Must be 2 months before we see it.
Got a lot of work ahead of me. Yeah.
No way to get that shorter.
If there is, I'll get it to you. Yeah, so I have, usually the process is it's a little bit later, and we sort of backed it up this year. But if I can get it out earlier, we will. I'd like to give, I know you've been waiting, so I understand, yeah.
Okay. Appreciate the update on that.
Yeah,
I guess if we want to move in, some of the questions that we brought up at our last meeting, I had sent out and sent to you also, just so you could see, I guess, a summary of what we were talking about last meeting. But we can, I think, dive right into those questions unless anyone else has any other agenda. Okay. So one of the things, obviously, we already touched on was the planning wages, some background on the notable increases on that. Not necessarily looking for justification of people's jobs by any means, but looking for the actual causes of increases, i.e., are they new positions? Were the planning wages, did code used to be in a separate line item and got moved into there? It looks, looking over the trend of the at least line item 2004 planning wages, in 21, 22 planning wages only showed 74,000, and last year or this current year, they're 267, so.
Right.
It looks like the biggest jump basically was fiscal year 21, 22 to 22, 23.
yep.
And then with jumps after that, is that mostly position
Yeah.
creation?
That was the ending of the contract with MCOG. So
Okay.
it was a $68,000 contract with MCOG, and then taking that effectively, what was a 3-day per week contract and into a full-time 5-day
So
position.
that $68,000 contract was in a separate line item
That's right,
that got rolled into this?
that's right. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And the other part is that the assistant wages are split, so there's about 27,000 in that year's budget that are assigned to the assistant position. Well, that was half-time between the police department and planning, and so that moved away from the police and into full-time with planning. Again, the idea to try to support some of the things that Jeff and is just talking about is the ease of use of trying to apply for permits and using all of these rather complicated ordinances that we have in this town, allow people to easily be able to apply for permits and work with what can be a pretty onerous end of things. That's the other part, and those of you may remember from last year, there was discussion about the potential of adding a third position in the clerk's office. You may recall this. So subsequently, and at the end of that process, we discussed splitting the time of this position we're talking about with the clerk's office. So the money still remains in the planning and community development department, but part of that person, that position's time is being spent in the clerk's office presently. So we were too late in the process and didn't want to start moving things around in the middle of, but that's effectively, there would be a reduction if we were moving the money in the department to the clerk's office.
John, besides broadening maybe the tax base in this town by having more taxpayers,
Yep.
is there a general agreement we need to have economic development in the town?
Certainly the comp plan seems to think so. And housing is obviously the chief driver of that. I hear people all the time wanting to talk about how do you, I think they feel the impact of a rising property values, and how do we find a way to mitigate that as individuals, right? And part of it is by the sharing of the burden. Part of it is, broadening the tax base, bringing in business, bringing in more housing, so we can find a way to manage that. I think those have to be parts. If we don't grow as a community, we will die. Now, Rockport has been a very vibrant community for many years, but there's been times it's been less vibrant than it is now. I mean, I remember a time when we could park out here without any problem. That's not the situation we find ourselves in anymore. But we also are facing inflation. We're facing a whole bunch of big problems all at the same time. But we can't lose the sight of we have to keep an eye on a bigger tent. Now, how do we make sure the tent doesn't become so big for us to be able to manage? That's somewhat of what we're talking about here. Of we can't get too far beyond the 3,700 people that we have and maintain the character. And that's what the comp plan talks about, is maintaining the character of who we are as a community. But we can't also act like we're a 10,000 person community, like, or something large, a Scarborough or a Gorham. That's not who Rockport is either. So we have to do both and keep our eye on trying to broaden the conversation, but also realize we aren't, and what we aren't.
I mean, you
at the same
think the
time.
solution, though, is economic development in Northwood?
We have to grow. We have to grow. Does that mean that we become something we are not, though? That's where I trust people like our planning board and the comp plan to tell us what that is. We went through this, 20 years ago, where we had this growth of subdivisions, and we had subdivisions on every corner, it seemed. It changed us to a degree, but it didn't change Rockport in its heart. And there was a way to sort of to live in both worlds of housing development and in a way that allows us to maintain our character. We had a strong comp plan, we had a strong planning board, and allowed us to hold that true. I think what we see now is we do have a lot of people concerned about what's happening in their backyard. And I think that is something as a community we have to talk about and say, with all honesty, of what are we willing to accept? How much do I want to worry about what's in my neighbor's backyard? That is something that is very real, and the cost of construction that we're used to, of the acre lot with a cape on it with 2,000 square feet, that's unaffordable to most people. So we have to talk about a different type of building, a different type of living. And that's going to take a community-wide conversation, a comp plan. It speaks to all these issues. We have a good planning board. We have a good group of people in our planning office to make sure our ordinances are respected. But it's a complicated matter. And as residents, we all have individual feelings about that are, coming forth as we deal with things like Rock Road and other things. So it's a complicated problem, Bill. And I think we have to grow, but that's a simple answer. It's a sort of pat answer,
The problem is, we have these services, whether it's fire, police, EMS, and that's gotta be balanced, those expenses go to
Right.
the taxpayers
That's right,
versus how many houses we're gonna build here.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't
It is-
get ahead of one without the other, right? 100%.
Yeah, I want to be a little careful that there's long-term trends. And there's the recent spike. The spending increase is not a 20-year problem. It's like a 3 or 4 year problem. Like, you track that number over time, it goes pretty flat. Like, even looking at the planning department wages, I've got it back to 2013. It's flat, and then it spikes. So I'm with you that we have planning boards and we do long-term planning, and that's worth doing. But I don't want to consume a lot of time when we get to the budget process. I'm happy to sit and have a philosophical discussion. We can go down and have a beer and talk. I'm happy to do that, but I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the reason we spent some time on this is trying to get to, like, why did we see this spike literally in the last 4 years? It's flat and it just goes like this. So I take it, and I know you said last year we've had we put off doing things we needed to do, we got backlogged on things, we got some
Absolutely.
thorny problems like EMS we had to solve. And so I realize a lot landed on your plate to have to manage, but I'm hoping that we spend some time, and one of the things I think is on our agenda is thinking about what that budget hearing process looks like, and whether we can figure out a way to spend those 4 days, 4 meetings, not 4 days. I don't think it'll be 4 days.
I hope not.
4 meetings over the 4 days, focused on those things, right? Like, what are those, this is why we spent time on the cost driver thing.
Sure.
Is love to have Carrie in here to talk about, great assessment. I'm not worried about assessment. Like,
Yeah.
it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we can think about how do we focus on those, like, really critical things that have just, are the things that I'm getting stopped in the supermarket and the dog walks and people saying, what is going on?
Yeah.
So I don't want to lose sight of those recent things. We just have to be able to explain to the town
Yeah.
why we've had this spike in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and I don't really want to spend too much time on that because I think, we did those 4 years that we went through the budgets with those budget committees and
Yep.
those select boards, and it's sort of, we are where we are. Where we are now is a 27 budget that will reflect hopefully where we think we're going to be in 27, which might be down, might be up, might be, that has to reflect where we are. There's nothing that's, that condemns us to live with the sins of the past, nor are we condemned to stick with what we have done.
Yeah, that's true.
That we are here to make good decisions and new decisions every year. So and I'm not trying to say the effort to look at what was doesn't have any value. Of course it has value to understand. You need to understand why we are where we are. I guess my point is that the issues and the opinions of where we are and what we're facing in 2027 are maybe different than they would have been in 2021, 2022. And so, these are, I agree. I don't think we want to have a philosophical
Yeah.
conversation, and I don't think there's probably, there's need for that. But I think the point being of where we are and what we're facing today is one where, we need to be mindful of that, that balance of housing versus need service delivery. And I think that's something we should be doing every year. And I think the other thing I would just mention, that spike, we did see a spike. We saw a spike in people moving in. We saw a spike in values. We saw a spike in requests for services. That occurred, but it's not occurring at the same level today as it was in 2022, 2021. And I think that's part of where we are too. So I think we can all, with a much more leveled playing field that we all understand, can have an easier conversation of what the future looks like. Because I think the future of 2027 looks more like what we're seeing today than what we saw in those years just after COVID, where things were wild and things were not, they're very unsettled. So, do you want me to jump into some of this, Clay? Or
Yeah, I was
what's
just
your
gonna keep
thought?
rolling down through, kind of some of the questions I emailed you there. We'll just get
Yeah.
through that first and then, I guess open it up after that. One of the other big topics that we were talking about, were some of the road construction costs. Of course, we kinda, what was it, four or so years ago, decided to raise or use the 10-year standard for repaving on the roads, which I think explains one of the big jumps from 21, 22 to 22, 23. But it seems like more recently, to include last year, we're starting to take some of that road construction budget, and although that line item, the 7605, is increasing, we're also increasing in like 5347, the supplies for road construction material.
Right.
And then some contractual services for gravel and roadway repair, which I think is edging and et cetera. But
Yep, that's right.
I think one of the things that if we start looking at total expenditures with road maintenance, it seems like it's encompassing more than just a line item that it used to of the 7605 road construction.
Right. Yep.
And I worry that we're just starting to say, we don't want to increase that line item too much. So we're gonna, you know, put a little gravel over here, and we're gonna put a little more gravel over here, and, you know, that I think is one of the, when Steve ran through the numbers, one of the things that shows up easily, just because, you know, those expenditures weren't happening in that line item previously. So I guess it's not even really a question, but more of it is, we're gonna probably be looking at those, kind of diluted expenses throughout the different line items in that.
Yeah, so so some of you may recall this as the biggest change in the roads budget from 24, 25 to 25, 26 was this particular issue. And the reason for this, the increases in gravel and materials, you know, culverts, as well as, well, those predominantly. But issues like that is that we were largely finding that we were completing roads and we were borrowing from Peter, you know, taking from Peter to pay Paul. We were not adequately putting enough money in to complete the project. So we were short because we were spending more on gravel and culverts than we were estimating. And as a result, then that's taking from money that we should be spending on paving. So we were not properly really laying out that project and getting a fair estimate of what it actually costs to complete a given road project. And so as a result, going into last year's budget, there was a new thought that went into it, which was we do ensure, one, that we have the adequate materials to complete the project, right? So we had a lot of conversation about that through the budget process, about that was really the major change in this department. Here's the good news. The good news is, so we just went through probably our most active building construction season we've ever had in the town of Rockport, okay? We replaced 36 culverts, we paved almost 6.5 miles of road, we culvert drainage, we've hit all the marks that we wanted to in terms of completing the road project. Here's the good news. The good news is we didn't spend nearly as much as we thought it would take to complete that. And part of that was being on top of our budgets, being on top of how much material we're ordering from different suppliers, being on top of what we're required to complete a project. The Public Works Director saying, look, we're just digging this out. That's good gravel. We don't need to go out and buy new gravel. And telling them, let's put that back in. We don't need to go out and buy a new, have another delivery just to fill that. Somewhat at the consternation of staff at times, but that's what you need to do to try to make sure we hold the line. So the good news is that's happening. And as a result of that, I think we're gonna be able to see when the budget comes in here next month, is a reduction in some of these, not just because of the projects that will be brought forward, but also in understanding what we're asking. So I think that's a good thing. I think that allows us to really to complete the projects as proposed, but also we're getting better and we're getting more efficient in what we're doing. So I think that's a good effort. The other thing we also did, when we edge the roads after they're paved. So the idea really is to make sure that you aren't damaging and cracking this pavement that you just laid down on these roads. And we had one of our crew leaders, Greg Bowman, rigged up a chute to basically allow us to do that work ourselves. So we don't have to hire out a contractor at X number of dollars per hour. And that's what we budgeted for, and largely for that contractor to complete that work. But that little ingenuity in-house is gonna allow us to basically do it for cost of the gravel that we're placing down on the ground. That's the type of thing that's been going on here over the last 6 months. And I sort of put something in my town manager's report, because that's, we want to champion those things, and those people were trying to find ways to get us to save wherever they can. So I think we're going to see some savings there. I think we're going to see, when you see those quarterly reports, that we're going to be underspent in some of those areas to where we would be generally at this time, given the fact we've just completed road projects, usually we're far ahead. But there's that effort, and just sort of broadly in public works. The other thing that we're doing more and more of is sending people home. So last night, we had a little bit of a flurry, right? So that's, that's causes our crew to have to go out and plow and do their thing, and thank goodness for it. They had to come back out at 3 to make sure that school could happen, and we had no delays in our district, thank goodness. Others around us did. But a lot of the crew, we said, hey, can you go home? Do you want to go home? You're maxed out on your comp time. They will go home. They'll come back in tonight because it's going to do it again. But those are the things that we're doing and our staff is doing, our public works director is doing to try to pull back. If someone's been out all night plowing, how much are they going to be able to accomplish when they're working? Now, there's some requirements by our CBA with our union contract that we have to fulfill, and that's what that is. But everyone is picking up a piece of this to try to lighten the load, and we got to. And I'm appreciative of it for sure.
John, you said our current replacement cycle is 10 years?
On road maintenance, yeah.
What was it previously?
It's always been 10 years as far as I knew, but we never lived by it. So we had, and this is back to my old days here, largely what had happened is that we had a 17-year very aggressive schedule through the 90s and early 2000s. And we got to the end of that cycle, and I think there was probably, rightly so, people like all of us sitting around this room and said, roads look pretty good, we probably don't need to have the same investment. That's my read of it. And so they spent $250,000, which was in today's dollars, but basically over a 10-year period, they paved about a quarter number of miles of road as a 10-year cycle would have suggested. And so as a result, when 2021, 2022 rolls around and I come in the door, we also had a couple bonds issues that the town had approved to catch up on paving all at once. But we did not catch up. And so as a result, we had roads that were not just in bad condition, but in the condition of we needed literally take it up. Lime Rock Street, the upper part of Lime Rock Street above the library had to be physically removed. Alexander Drive and Ledgewood had to be physically picked up because we simply couldn't pave over what was there. And we also ran into this with Park Street, and so some of that is what has been the remnants of that. Now here's the good news. Here's the good news, Bill, is I think we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that we're going to get to the end of this cycle, and I mentioned some of this at the capital plan. I think we're going to be at the end of that to where there's maybe a different horizon you can look at that still allows us to stay on a cycle, but not on the same schedule we've been on over the last few years. Because unfortunately, if you don't stay on this schedule, when we put that road off, instead of simply paving over, we are digging up. And that's my concern, is that then we lose cost containment of that project. And Ledgewood was supposed to be just a simple pave over, and instead we were there all summer. That can't happen, because that's labor that we're wasting, and we should be spending on other projects elsewhere.
So you're looking at trying to stick with that 10-year-ish schedule at this point?
Yeah,
That's not to say every road is done every 10 years.
No, I understand.
That's right.
I just, what I'm trying to get to is, we were slow, and then we caught up, and we went
Yes.
on a 10. And you're thinking, we need to stick to that from your perspective for near term, then maybe consider backing off. That's what I'm hearing you say.
yeah, that's exactly right. You look at the capital plan, and I suggest anybody take a look through it. I mean, and again, I would also suggest that last year the budget that I proposed didn't beat the 10-year plan. We were short about a mile of road with what I proposed because I couldn't get us that number. I was trying to bring that overall cost increase down. But I think still focusing on that 10-year cycle target allows us to stay focused on that as the standard. If we can't afford that, we fall somewhat short of the horizon, despite our 1 year, our 1% goal. At least we're trying to shoot for that. But I see a lot of work that still needs to be accomplished.
Fair enough, I just wanted to
Yeah.
get a sense for where you were.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly a good one. I guess in my head, what we bounce around is we're already halfway through a 10-year cycle on this plan, and if we're starting to see, our diligence paying off, if we rolled that back to an 11-year cycle, you've got 10% of your savings right there, which obviously make a pretty good dent in that budget, that line item.
And one thing I would just very quickly mention is that it was subdivision, we accepted a lot of subdivision roads 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
many of them were never touched. And so as a result, when we started to touch those subdivision roads, the costs were very expensive and very, very time consuming. And so as a result of that, we were having to meet that standard, and it wasn't on your vinyl streets and your Russell, it was those types of areas. The good news is likely you won't have to have the same touch when you go back to that subdivision road, because it is lightly traveled and lightly, but you have to get to it before it falls apart. And unfortunately, we didn't.
John, I remember a discussion a long time ago about subdivision roads, and the town did not accept it because it did not meet certain standards.
Yeah.
How many of the roads that were brought in 20 years ago in those subdivisions met the town standards? I'll put it this, how many were accepted even though they did not meet town standards?
Well, I think if you were to ask those involved at that time, they'd say they all did.
Better not answer that question, John.
Yeah, I think I might leave it there, but I think we know a lot more now about what it takes, and I think we also have not accepted it. We accepted one town road off of West Street Extension. That's the only road we've accepted in the last 20 years.
Well, the current acceptance discussion revolves around that very issue at this point.
100%.
So,
Yeah, 100%. So, yeah, so that, I think that somewhat describes, I think that question. Yeah.
Just quickly on this, and again, we don't need, I know we got a long list. And I just said a few minutes ago I didn't want to have a philosophical discussion, but I'm going to take that back.
Go for it. Fire away.
Well, because I think one of the things that is a recurring theme, both with the budget discussion last year, here tonight, capital improvement plan, is this idea of all of these things being on cycles, and cycles, and cycles. And we've got 10-year cycles, and 4-year cycles, and 5-year cycles, and 9-year cycles.
Yeah.
Listening to you describe sort of how we got into the situation where we needed to sort of ramp up rapidly, strikes me as a management problem, frankly, obviously before you got here. But, and I'm trying to, in my head, I'm trying to balance out how much are we autopiloting these things and saying, this is what we need to do on 10 years, we're gonna do this in 10 years. I mean, you did Cross Street this summer. I appreciate it, it's lovely, it's flat, it's nice. I would argue it probably could have gone a few more years before it got done. And so I'm wondering how you think about it, and maybe this is something that is cross-cutting again when we get to the budget discussion in a couple of months, how you balance relying on these cycles to tell the staff when and where and how often and what to do versus how much are we counting on our folks to be professionals and say, we know this road gets more traffic, we know this new employer went in, has a bunch of big trucks, these kinds of things. Because it feels like it's easy from a public policy point of view to say, well, we're just on a cycle. So we're just
Right.
going to, look,
Yeah.
the truck is 8 years old. We're on an 8-year cycle, sorry.
Right.
So, and you said something earlier about the vehicles, and we'll get into that. But
Yeah.
I think it would be and again, I don't want to do this tonight. I don't want to have a pre-budget hearing tonight. But, but it would be helpful when we do get to the budget in
Yeah.
a few weeks, when those occasions arrive, to get some sense of like how you're balancing that as a manager
Yeah.
between, we're setting some targets
Right.
that help us think about, oh, we got to pay attention to that,
Yeah.
versus how much of this is just removing, because this cost can just skyrocket if we're like, look, the road's got to be paved, and it's 10 years, I don't know what to tell you,
Right.
but So, and I know you're not doing that, but there's a,
Right.
there's a management question here, and I'm thinking what you're telling me is in the late teens, we should have been more actively managing those roads than we did. That's a management problem. So I'm just trying to, there's a tension there that I think is worth spending some time on.
I'm gonna take maybe a little bit of leave of Bill's, I don't wanna get anyone in trouble who is no longer in the positions they are. I do think there was some real missteps in that regard. But to your bigger question, which is how do we make sure we're not automatons?
Yeah.
Just sort of, just press the
Yeah.
button and make the widget and go. So every year that we have that capital improvement process, that 5-year list of, the list of 5 years out of roads, that, every year that list shifts and it adapts. What doesn't change is the total number, because on a 10-year cycle, well, 1/10 of 72 miles is 7.2 miles. Like, we all can do that. But the question of what rises up the list, what falls down the list, can vary wildly. And Park Street is probably the best example of that, of one that was meant to be 2 years out.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, we get in the middle of the budget process, forget the capital improvement plan in October, but we're in March with that budget committee and saying, forget what we told you, we've got to change things up. So that's constantly happening. For you all, it's probably to say, well, the budget number stays the same because it's 72 miles of road, 1/10, 7.2 miles. That doesn't change, but the names and what constitutes that list change rapidly. And we'll get it.
Okay.
And since you mentioned the trucks, I mean, I think the trucks are also under that same guise of saying, sure, you keep a truck every, 6 years, it's 12 years instead. But which trucks you keep may not be the newest truck. You might keep the oldest truck because that's the one that's reliable. That's the one that does what you want it to. It may be that you had less issues with that than even a newer truck. So those are the judgments that staff are making, because nobody wants an unreliable vehicle, an unreliable stapler. You're always making those judgments to make sure you have a better stable of what you have to operate. So, but it's a philosophical, but it's a really important philosophical question.
Well,
so I appreciate that.
so I'm hoping this is helpful to you to have this, because I'm hoping it's giving you some sense of
Sure.
what we're probably going to ask you.
Yeah, no. it's good.
And that's
Yeah.
probably going to be part of it.
Sure,
It's
absolutely.
that justification for if we were going to, and again, it's good to hear you think we've maybe bent the curve here a little bit on this.
I think so, yeah.
Those kind of trade-offs, we have to spend some time exploring, because
Yeah.
it is easy to let the thing just sort of spiral.
100%. And the other thing that you don't have none of you have the experience of is, well, I mean, I guess Helen and Jeff were here for some of those conversations, but we sort of worked through a lot of this with prior select boards and prior budget committees about what was ahead of us. And in fact, what the conversation I said to one budget committee member was asking about it, it's somewhat of a similar, give and take as you and I are having, Steve, is I said, the 10-year schedule might not be enough for us to catch up. We might see that the costs we're facing by the time we get to it are greater, and we have to go faster than 10 years. Thank goodness that wasn't the case, and we were able to stay on cycle. And apart from what we're talking about in terms of gravel and material, apart from that, we've been able to really stay on that 10-year cycle. And again, I think, I don't have any wood around me, but to bend that curve in a way that I think can allow us to get some more constant and stable expenditures in road construction. So that's the hope as we move forward.
Okay, and I'm just gonna switch on the list a little bit, switch down, just because we were already talking about vehicles. I think one of the other things like Steve was mentioning, probably some finite questions we'll be asking if we're needing a new vehicle. Well, what was the cost of ownership over the course of last year?
Yeah.
Over the
That's a good
previous
question.
year, and
Yeah.
just so whoever's coming in can at least have a heads up of maybe having some numbers ready.
Yeah, and if I could just quickly talk about, because there was one question here about number of vehicles and like the relative conversation about vehicles versus people. there was a conversation with the budget committee, I want to say 3 years ago, might be 4, and Helen and Jeff, feel free to step in if, and maybe you were still around, Clay, I'm not sure, but about this issue about vehicles. And at that time, the town had a number of line items, and maybe you've seen it as you've sort of gone through and looked at historical work, about mileage, right? And mileage here, mileage here, mileage here. And the thought process that one particular budget committee member and a select board member had about that was to move away from mileage and really more towards having more vehicles as sort of a basis for how we operate and use that as opposed to, because that cost of ownership might be lower than what we're actually paying out in mileage. That was one approach and one policy, and we've pursued that and continue to follow it. But this is where the important conversations that happen with the budget committee and the select board, spur this. So that conversation occurred, and eventually there's a budget that's presented to respond to what that call was, which was, okay, we want to take a different approach. Is it right? Is it wrong? I'm not totally sure, honestly, if what the right or wrong approach is, but that was the approach pursued at that time. If that's a different approach that we want to pursue it, we can do that. But it was a policy goal, and so we pursued it. And that's really what we try to do. And you hope that you can have good results and they work out. Some work out well, some don't. And that's, that's sort of going back to the point of there's nothing that holds us to where we are, right? We're always one budget away from having a solution. So let's think about that at 27. Maybe we've got a better solution, this issue or any other.
The other thing that happened during those conversations was also support for the idea that most vehicles, sort of normal vehicles, not the Oshkosh, had this magic number at 100,000 miles that you could get the day before it turned to 100,000. You could get 20% more for that vehicle on a trade-in than the day after. So, and now that figure may change. It may be 125 or something.
Yeah. Right.
Something to look into. But that was strongly supported at that time.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think just a lot of feedback that I've been getting from townspeople is just that it obviously we made the shift to have town-owned vehicles and our employees driving those vehicles, but the vehicles that they end up in are not necessarily the vehicles that some of the townspeople would have picked. Just based on price, we could have got cheaper vehicles that would still complete the same job. We could have had more cost-effective models or trim levels. That I think that kind of gets into the weeds a little bit because those are low dollar values here or there. But the issue is that it can set the standard of mentality for, we're just blowing money on all the fancy stuff that we don't need, So I think that's kind of something to keep in mind, and I think those will probably be questions that come down the pipe.
And I think also, right, and I think, you had mentioned that during last year's budget process, I think, and I think that's something we have to keep an eye on is, you're right. These are vehicles that everyone has to sort of, not only are we all funding their operation and the gas that goes into them and everything else, but we have to make sure that we're reflective of, the people and what we're trying to do. And I think that was a really good point, Clay.
To John, in terms of what people use, we repurpose some our vehicles over time. An old police cruiser might go to Public Works or, so we are saving some money that way rather than buying
Right.
a new vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about the buildings and grounds was one of those situations where, we just repurposed the old.
And how did we come to have an EV, by the way?
That was part of that was in the planning and community development budget a couple of years ago. Plugged in.
I see it plugged in. I went, when did we get an EV?
Yep, it works pretty consistently on just the EV side of things, and got a really good price on the series, the second level charger there, and it's worked well.
Where is that vehicle?
It's the town office.
Yeah, you see it
Planning and
plugged
community development. So the code officer largely uses that for his site visits when he's going out checking out, the plumbing
That's
and so
versus
forth.
giving him a mileage on his own car.
Yeah, so that was part of that discussion of mileage versus vehicles, and here we are, so.
When did that change take place? 2021,
Ah.
22, or
No, it was after, I wanna say that was 22, 23, or,
so we've had a couple of years of data?
Yeah.
Have we gone back and looked at it and seen the cost?
no, we haven't, no, we haven't sort of judged, I mean, one, we haven't had to buy any other sort of off-cycle vehicles, so, we have our public works vehicles, we have had to buy actually another, fire truck, but police is the only vehicle we've purchased, since the EV was purchased. So no, we haven't really had that sort of cost benefit done. I think that there is, I mean, certainly it's being used every single day. But I think there's always that debate of would you save by just simply writing out the mileage checks to employees,
And
you know?
it could go for, in that position, it could go for multiple ones in the past.
It could, absolutely,
Right,
totally
but
agree.
you don't need to guess that, because we
Right,
have,
that's my-
we have all that information. So we talked about, like, the fire chief, we provide the fire chief with a truck. So we know what the truck payments are, we know what the insurance is, we know how much gas he puts in it, we know
Right.
what we spend on tires and brakes and batteries and whatever else. And we know how many miles it went. So can't we just run the numbers and say, if we had paid him mileage
Yeah.
for his
Oh,
own
yeah.
truck, it would cost this
Oh,
versus
sure.
what, okay, so.
Oh, yeah, no,
To
we-
add
we-
to your to-do
yeah.
list for when you come back in a few weeks, like, I mean, I think that's a
Yeah.
pretty easy calculation to make, to
Yeah.
say. And again, for whatever reason, philosophically, the decision was made that we're gonna buy more vehicles than pay mileage. But it's, at the end of the day, it's just a math problem.
Yeah,
There's
it
no
is.
philosophical
Totally
kind of
agree.
question about it at all. It's
Totally
just-
agree.
I think that also works into the timeframe, like the capital improvement plan. So we know that
Yeah.
that vehicle's gonna get replaced in 18 months.
Yeah.
Or a year or 2 years.
Yeah.
If we ran the math now, instead of replacing it at that point, we
Yep.
could say, oh, we're gonna go back to the way it was,
Yeah,
whatever,
No,
X date.
I
There's
totally
not
agree.
One department
Yep.
over another, just individually.
Yeah.
So it could be- it doesn't have to be blanket.
No, I agree with
One
that.
offs.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Carrying on. So obviously a lot of talk last meeting and every other meeting since then, or previous to that, I should say. We've been talking about regionalizing and regionalization and what there is even for options out there. I think that is probably, that's far higher level than just what the budget committee's gonna pull off, but is there, I guess, what is the possibility of making yet another task force to determine what it would even take to research regionalizing, research, some of the different unions that would be involved, research some of the positions that would be either dropped or made. I guess, what's the process for coming up with some sort of group that would spearhead that? I don't think it's necessarily feasible for any of our department heads to stop their full-time job and figure out kind of how we can work with other towns.
Well, and this is a longer-term issue too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. I
something
mean,
that's-
this is certainly not a this budget cycle issue either. So that, I guess that's why, where do we start if everyone keeps touching on it? When is it that someone says, let's do this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the easy part is saying what could potentially be regionalized. What do we already provide of services that potentially there could be a partner, right? I think the first part is to identify what is it that we already are providing for service that might have might somewhere have a partner. We don't know who that partner is. I think we can do that we could probably start tonight and have a pretty good whiteboard going, I think the real work though, is that outreach, right? And I think it'd take members of this group, maybe select board, staff, it would take a number of people, I think, to get there. But, it's pat to say we're always looking at regionalization when we are, it's true. But I think where we are right now, we need a lot of bodies at the table to really look broadly and deeply at some of these things. And, I think, it can't simply be a pat answer to say, well, it would be nice, we had we talked a lot
Yeah,
about
we
it
talked
last
about it.
year.
Yep, we did.
And there's a lot of, from my side, there's a lot of disappointment in, 20 years ago, there was a lot of potential, a lot of conversation, right? And Steve was involved in that, the
Yeah.
charter, the county, and a bunch of, other levels. But there's a lot of disappointment, I feel, in that we were never really able to crack the code. And I think it doesn't mean that those are bad ideas now. It's just, okay, maybe it's a new take, it's a new look. I think coming up with our list of what we could do is a really simple one. I think it's going to take some work and having conversations with those across town lines to do it. But I think it's a whole of the town issue. It's a town manager. It's a budget committee. It's a select board. It takes all of us.
Yeah, the question is, are you, the select board, do you have it on the agenda to look at what the possibilities are, regionalization?
Well, I think as I said, Bill, I think we're always looking.
Yeah, but
I think he's asking
Right.
whether it's a specific thing, right? I mean, in
Right.
other words,
I mean,
this is a topic.
Is it of interest to the select board or you?
Always.
So what is-
Absolutely.
So what is being done on it?
Well, I think it's a question of issue by issue. So whether it's wastewater, whether it's fire, whether it's EMS, whether it's something on a smaller level, whether it's general assistance. I mean, there's always conversations that are going on of what can work, what does work, but to actually get all of the pieces to fit, all the governmental agencies to agree to it, that's been difficult. Our most important piece of our public safety, the underpinning of all that really fell apart because we didn't have ample support at the county level to make that work in terms of the 911 call center. So all of these efforts, as good or as possible or as close as they are to connecting, are going to require a lot of work and continued support. So I guess the answer is let's get to work. Let's get a group that wants to come through that list and do that. I don't think there's anyone who would say, no, we don't want to consolidate or regionalize.
Yeah, I'm just
You know.
saying, somebody has to take the initiative to start the discussion. And to me, if the select
Yeah.
board or you are not interested, nothing's gonna happen.
Oh, yeah, no, that's,
So I mean, you gotta
Well,
pick,
he's
you
not
gotta
the
pick the
problem.
topic and say, we gotta get started and see what we can do.
yeah, I can only speak for myself, but my door's open all the time, probably too open
But
at
is
times.
anything being done?
Yeah, well, is there anything being done? There's conversations all the time. We have a joint, police. We have Carrie, who's an assessor in two communities. We have things that are working. We have things that we could potentially work through. We have joint, in fact, solid waste and wastewater. There's a lot that we collaborate on now. Can we go beyond that? It will take more layers and other select boards to buy into, not just our own, to say,
No,
yeah,
I
we think this
understand
is
that.
good.
Just, I mean, when you look at the cost of the EMS that we've taken on,
Yeah,
seems to me there should be some kind of initiative to find out. We used to have the Camden First Aid, remember?
Yep.
Years ago.
I do.
Took care of Camden, Rockport.
Yes.
It seemed to work quite well. I'm just saying with the money we're spending on that, isn't it worthwhile, even though we have new ambulances and so forth?
Yeah.
To go back and relook and see if we can't do something to get the cost down
Well-
on EMS for this town.
There was a lot of work that went in to try to do that. And I don't want to speak for
And I know
the
it
other
was,
communities,
'cause-
but there was a lot of
I
work
know
to
there
try
was
to do
Denise,
that.
Denise was mentioning it to me before,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, with the number that we have in our budget,
I agree.
I think it's something that should not be let go and say, well, it won't work.
No, and there's no way we can let it go, because the truth is that the best way for this to work is to go as close back to that model as we could, right? I can't make our neighbors to the north agree with that necessarily. They have their own method that they want to choose. I wish them well. We would like to work with, we're working a lot with Rockland, we're working a lot with other agencies. We covered the town of Hope, even their fire service a couple weeks ago. There's regionalization happening all the time. We're getting, to give you a sense of that, we're gonna get billed, or we are billing to Northeast $12,000 for covering their ambulance service for the last 2 months. That's because their service couldn't cover that community and the 3 other communities. Rockport picked up that. So if I would, I'm trying to be kind.
You're doing a great job.
I'm trying to be kind.
You're doing a great job.
I totally agree with you,
I know,
Bill.
I know.
I
I just wanna see
100%
something
with you.
happen, that's
Let
all.
me be a little
Yeah.
more direct. So, I don't know if you noticed, I managed to get myself a little sideways with your compatriot in Camden, in the newspaper. And,
It happens.
yeah, I'm sure. And it's clear to me that there's very little interest from some people in doing this work, and that any regionalization constitutes some kind of cut to services, it can't be done without delays, blah, 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 blah. So, I think what I'd be interested, and I don't know, this probably goes beyond the budget committee, but my sense is we need, let's say, for example, that there was a community group that was already started, that was interested in leaning into this, that had representatives in different towns around, and was looking for a way to both facilitate these kinds of discussions, support these kinds of discussions, put the appropriate pressure on certain people who don't seem to want to be part of these discussions or are not prioritizing it. How could we think about, and we don't answer this tonight, but I'm with you
No,
that this is a much bigger issue than the town.
Yeah.
And you have to have a dance partner to do the dance, I get that. It just doesn't, and I know you've done good work, and, the chief talked about work with Rockland on EMS. It just feels like there's limits to what we can do, there's limits to what you can do, there's limits to what the board can do. And it feels like it's time for something else in the way of a citizens group, or something that can move this in the way that we were moving it, a couple of
Yeah.
decades ago. Because I certainly learned in the last few days that there's no interest in doing this regionalization from some folks around here.
And you're referring to Rockport, or are you talking about someplace else?
Camden.
Camden.
Because, they were not interested in working with us on sewer either. Except all of a sudden, our select board stood up
Yeah.
and started having discussions with them. All of a sudden found people on that board, okay, we're interested. And somehow we worked out a deal that we can continue with our agreement with Camden.
Yeah, we gotta be careful with that.
What's that?
If you want, I can't talk in public about that, but I can tell you more about that
Yeah,
story.
but we got an agreement, Denise, after,
You can get an agreement
Yep.
with anyone
Yep.
if you give them everything they want.
Yes,
Right.
it's easy.
Well, that I suppose is my question, is it seems like, it's kind of pointless to hope that everyone wants to be your friend. You have to kind of make a convincing argument to the people of Camden, to the select board of Camden. Maybe that's naive too, but to show, Camden's tax has been going up a lot too, I'm sure that if there were a way to say, produce, and, it doesn't need to be the full comprehensive report, but just some sort of a study on what if the police departments were combined? It could be this sort of savings. What if EMS would combine? It could be this, just to start getting some interest and some pressure from, a groundswell of pressure, if you will, but that's
And-
my
And
question.
just in terms of a larger group, and I think it's a situation where you need the professionals who are in whatever given that field is, whether it's EMS, fire, police, solid waste, whatever it might be, right? You need them to know the details, because the details, as we found in that wastewater discussion, the details really do matter. And you hate to have, sorry, I've got everyone calling me apparently on us, not from Camden, but wanting to know about,
We're gonna check the viewership.
they have their own meeting right now, I'm sure, so. But I think there is you need to have the detail, those in the field, in the room. You need to have the select board in the room because they are the body who is representing. But I think there are those who have individual interests and connections. There was Bill, you were involved with a group that was sort of working and looking at wastewater and regional. Those connections are so important, and friendships and relationships, they cross town lines, right? And so I'm not trying to support an uprising in any other community, but I think there are ways in which all of us in the Mid-Coast need to look around and say, there's a way to do this better, right? And I think we had made some good headway in that time 20 years ago. And I think we can pick up the banner where that goes, but we also need people in positions like yours, to, budget committees and select boards to agree. And I don't think that's naive necessarily, but I think if we're calling for it, others will too. And I think that's, we put a group together that looks at regionalization. I think we can, if that's the magnet that draws in others, then that would be a wonderful thing.
And I think it's incredibly important that the town as a whole is behind this effort. It's gotta be, it can't be an individual group that just goes off on their own and does it because they think it's a good idea. It's gotta be the board, it's gotta be town staff, it's gotta be members of various committees that are applicable. Because if it's a group effort, and we all pull together in the same direction, then we'll have a whole lot more power to be able to go to these other communities and have meaningful conversations. But the politics is a huge piece of this.
I mean, the big group who would be behind it would be the Rockport taxpayers.
Well, agreed,
Sure.
but again, having sort of a coherent or a cohesive effort
Yeah, I
on behalf
understand.
of everybody is
Yeah.
incredibly important. And, we look at regionalization, Midcoast Solid Waste is that effort, schools are that effort.
We have a police chief.
Even the water is that effort, even though it's a private company, it's still a regionalized issue. Wastewater, not really, but it could be, should be.
Yep.
But, yeah, I couldn't agree more that this needs to be done.
So I guess with that, what is our next step? Is it to push John and the select board to try to put something together?
I think
Is
we
it-
just did.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly did that. Is it, we put some people in your office that try to form a group? I guess what is the next step to actually get that
There's usually people
support?
in my office, Clay, that's the problem. I think what I'd suggest is that the budget committee take a vote to recommend to the select board to create a task force involving members perhaps of the budget committee and other community members to, I don't know how far you want to go with, but explore the options for regionalization and reducing the cost of town services. And allow, that recommendation as a body that's voted upon by you, going to the select board, they meet, next Monday. There's most of them are sitting behind me as well, so they're hearing you, but I think in sort of in Bill's mind, the more that we're aligned in our thought and our, there may be different ways this comes to be, but the more we're aligned as one community looking at this together, that's a pretty powerful piece. And I think that could speak pretty strongly to our neighbors. When they can divide us and say, well, it's just the budget committee, or it's just the select board, or it's this group and not that group, they can divide us. But if we're together, we're pretty strong. And we're in the middle of everything. Geographically, we're in the middle of everything. So it really makes a lot of sense.
Okay, well, I appreciate feedback.
It would be helpful to get the select board's sense of that too, of their commitment to that. Because we did have, I can think of one member of the town staff who said, it's important to people of the town that their services are provided by people in the town. That fire truck, police truck, whatever it is, has Rockport on it and not Camden Rockport or Midcoast or whatever.
Yeah.
So it would be helpful to get a sense of the board's own sense
Yeah.
of the degree to which they are prepared to start with a blank sheet of paper and rethink this. I don't think I don't see anything in this book that we couldn't do regionally, frankly. I mean,
Right.
it's just, as I argued in
long
my
list.
paper, like it takes some creativity, it's outside the box thinking.
Right.
These town lines were put up in the 18th century, like, we can't keep doing this. So, but it would be helpful for some of us to hear whether that's enough of a priority for the select board, that it's worth doing the kind of engagement you're talking about versus how about we organize a citizens revolt and start voting down some budgets until people get the message?
Yeah.
Because that's the other
Well, I
option.
think it's John's suggestion that we put together a recommendation to form a task force, that's where you'll get the discussion,
Yeah.
right there. You know, I
Hope so.
wouldn't even worry about getting an upfront feel, I'd just say, here you go, have a chat.
I mean, I think a dialogue on that between the select board and the budget committee would be really helpful, because I think there's a presumption that regionalization equals cost savings, right? I mean, why else would you be talking about it? Maybe we just like regionalization for the sake of regionalization, or we just think it's good the more people you have working. But if it is cost savings, you know, that, I guess, is sort of how do you go about analyzing that? I mean, we had the experience with EMS, and we paid all the 3 towns paid the consultants to work with all of us to come up with a 3-town EMS service between Rockland, Camden, and Rockport. And when Rockport was called in to discuss what our share would be, they wanted us to have 12 full-time EMS employees. So rather than the 8 that's under this current budget, it would have been almost a $2 million price tag for us to participate in the regional effort. So that's just an example. I'm not ruling it out. We're totally open. I think the idea of a task force is good. And, you know, it'd be nice to find a partner or two. I mean, between Rockland and Camden, I think. You know, I don't think we really explored it as much with Rockland as we have with Camden. And we definitely, you know, at least on the wastewater front, didn't have a good taste through all of that. I mean, Camden basically said, this is how we're doing it, and we're not interested in doing it any other way. But they may be feeling more budget pressure as well. And if there are cost savings in doing it this way, because I think we do have residents in Rockport who are proud of the Rockport name, who really don't like Camden people. I mean, there is, and maybe I'm just, you know, it's things I've heard, and that's not the community I'm really engaged in. But we have heard from department heads that people like a police car that says Rockport, and they don't want. Now, I think we heard maybe more from the perspective of employees, that they wanted to work for Rockport Police, not a Camden Rockport Police Department. But we have to take that into account, and the sales pitch or the explanation with voters is, this is saving you money. This is why you're okay being part of a regional service for this, even if you, in a perfect world, would rather it be Rockport only. It's the same cost-benefit analysis that you all have been talking about. Let's run the numbers. Let's look into that. And you know, that's a piece of the sort of task force approach, is to be able to convince our voters that participating in some sort of a regional form of whichever of our departments would result in cost savings.
Yeah, to your point, Denise, I think 98% of the whole reason we'd even think about it would be cost savings.
That's what I'd
That's all
assume,
there is.
because otherwise it's not easy, right?
Well-
We each have our own, well, anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's more to it than that, and you remember that we had the discussion with Chief Gagnon, when he was in here, making the pitch for an added officer, and talked about the struggles that he's having with a tiny department, hiring, retaining people, getting them trained, having to have somebody in while somebody's being trained at the academy. Like, the challenge of running a town this small and trying to provide all these services. Yes, it's cost savings, but ideally, it's also an improvement of service. We've heard some of that theme tonight, because you just have more resources to bring to bear. And, you know, I don't think any of us would advocate for dismantling the school district and us running our schools and Camden running their schools. Like, it's possible to have a town and be proud of your town and have your parade in the town and have your donut festival in the town and still have a regional municipal services center that does half of the things in this book regionally, or countywide and provides those services, and you still get to keep your town. So I don't want it to be like, well, we're gonna have to do this all, or, you know, it's a complicated set of, I'm with you, it's complicated, and you do have to have dance partners, and there's people that, for whatever reason, aren't feeling any pressure to do it, and can get their budgets passed without having to do it, I get it. So, I'm encouraged that we continue to have a dialogue, and happy to, you know, be part of that, but it's,
And the last thing I'll say too, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Is that, you know, there's a lot of swirl about this that goes around, you know, I'll talk about it here, and then we talk about it there. Let's just package it together and get it looked at. And, you know, that analysis will be out of date in 10 years, but at least maybe we won't have the chat for 10 years. Let's just get it packaged and dealt with.
I'd settle for 3, but that's fine.
Yeah, well, I was trying to
I know.
match it with your road
The
program.
road, right, we'll get to the road, we'll get to Steve's Road again, and then we'll do it again, so there you go.
And one other quick information request. So the chief said that there had been discussions between Camden and Rockport around the police, and that the state was in the way, shockingly, somehow. There was a state policy, or there was something that was a barrier. I don't know, but if,
Yeah.
it would be helpful as part of this discussion, and again, we can do this when we get back together in a couple months, but to what degree are there barriers that we could have our legislative delegation work on, something like that, if those barriers exist? I'm not sure they do, but
Yeah, in short,
he
it's,
said that there were. So-
yeah, in short, it was a Department of Labor issue in terms of how overtime was classified and how that could, how you pay overtime. And that was where the state level,
Okay.
it's, yeah.
We'll
It's-
come back
It's
to
not
it. We
great.
don't- okay.
It's
We don't
not a
need-
great, it's not our finest hour as a state, or we're trying to do collaboration, but, yeah, no, we'll talk more about it.
Okay.
John, not to prolong this conversation, but 4 years ago, our police department wages were 358,000. Last year, there was 708,000,
Yep.
97% increase.
Yep.
The regionalization, at least we should take a look at it.
Well, here's the, and I'm not, here's what goes into that. So we had in the middle of that time, we had two new contracts. One that went up 33% in wages, and one that added $4 per hour to the wage. And that's to allow the town of Rockport to be at the bottom of the list in terms of comparable wages. So if, and again, I don't want to go too far into the weeds of
Now,
how
we
many,
probably shouldn't do it tonight, so.
but in terms of the cost to hire and to maintain a police officer, forget, a staff, but one officer has grown considerably. And unfortunately, the number of people, there aren't just enough people going into the service to make up for those coming out. And so there's this gap that's sadly creating a great deal of increase in costs on the police side of things.
From a process perspective, we talked about potentially holding the vote. Can we do that later, now?
I think as far as motions could be brought up about any time. I'm assuming that's what you're.
I'm just
Talking about-
trying to get, let's just move it down the road, right?
Yep, nope. I think if, while we're on the topic, if a motion's gonna be brought up, we might as well get one rolling now, so we,
I mean, I'll make a motion to recommend the select board establish a regionalization task force. Straightforward.
I'll second it.
okay. Okay, any other discussion on the motion to, recommend to the select board to establish a regionalization task force? No other discussion, okay.
It's great when you tell somebody else to do all the work.
Yeah. Okay, then, let's go to a vote. All those in favor of the motion? Okay, unanimous. Good.
4E just came off the agenda.
Yeah, I like that. All right, moving on to, I think the last bullet point we kind of talked about from our last meeting was determining if there's a target budget number that we can use as a benchmark going forward. Something, similar to like an LD1, where it gives you basically the framework of this is what your budget needs to shoot for. Do we, I guess, is going through the budget process, is it still, or not still, but is it a process where you just, like you referenced earlier, try to balance the budget on meeting the needs of what the departments are requesting? Or do you go into the process with a number, whether it be percentage or whatnot?
So, I think there's a number of ways in which the process can work. And I think that what we've seen in Rockport is we've seen a number of different ways this has happened through the years. There are budget committees who have set targets, there's select boards who've set target numbers, and some of them have been rather arbitrary through that time. Some use cost of living, some have used, LD1, type calculations of, some growth factors to determine of how much it should grow. My budget is really, I think, to prepare and present to the board and to the budget committee what a year's worth or what a prospective year's worth of intention of meeting the current request for service, okay? So our intent is to meet what all of our departments, excuse me, are seeing for requests for service. That doesn't mean that's the final determination as to what the budget should be. In no way does that reflect what the political realities of what our community is calling for. So the entire process is some amalgamation of calls for service, impact by our community and what our residents are feeling, individual outlook and view of elected officials. And it's through that, the 14 people who are elected, they're in that process with feedback from staff. But it's the 14 people who are elected who really set that number. I don't believe I have yet to see that there's one gold standard that I should present to you. And I've also seen, just in the conversation we've had about vehicles, it has wavered and moved and shifted over time. I don't believe that there is a number or a standard that I need to present to you all. I think it's about a conversation, and I think that conversation in the month of March is why we talk about and go department by department, almost line by line, because there's a story in every single one of them. Doesn't mean that there may be, we all agree, of course we should do X, or you're foolish, John, we should be doing Y. It's my job to tell you what I think I propose, but I don't have the final say in that matter. And so, absent that, you all have the final say. I believe it's my place to provide options and information for you to chew on and to make decisions upon. So I don't view this as I'm gonna solve to this test. But I would say this, I think there are ways in which we can perhaps put objective measures out there. And we've tried to do this to a better degree. We had a lot of conversation, excuse me, I'm so choked up about this. But we had a lot of conversation about metrics through the budget process last year and trying to improve them. Our staff don't do a great job of thinking about how many miles of road they plow every time they go around. They don't do a great job of figuring how many people have come up to the desk to get a birth certificate. But that's what drives our work, is providing those services. So we've tried, we're still not quite there, thus the 2 review standards for me to meet with the department heads, to say, we need to understand and we need to help you to understand, okay, this is what we're provided as staff. Now, Does that mean that we just meet that level? Does it mean we should augment that level? That's another level of conversation. But we haven't done a good job of that. So we need, one, we need to get that baseline down. Two, what are the expectations beyond that? What do we want? Do we want something different? I know that there's, excuse me, been some conversation of, well, what does the community want, right? Of, we think we're meeting a standard, and I would say universally, everyone who works on behalf of the town is trying to do their best to meet the standard that they believe is what everyone in town would want it to be. I believe that. But maybe they're wrong, right? That's why we do this, right? We do this so that way that standard may be altered or augmented. And so I think that I don't think that there's one number. I don't think there's one metric that says what the overall rate of increase should be. But I think what I try to do is hear where you are, hear what we're all feeling. But that budget book is filled with 18 different overall standards of property valuation growth and COLAs and CPIUs that we could all talk about as what the right number is. And some of that is a political discussion that the 9 of you have to make, or the 5 of the board have to make, in terms of what speaks to them and what speaks to our community. So,
At the last meeting we had, I read this question as a different question. And I thought we were gonna ask John what instructions you give to your department heads when they're putting their budget together.
okay.
Do you say to them, I want you to come to me with something that's 1% less than we gave you last year? You come up with a plan to say how we're gonna achieve it. I'd like to see what you can do with the budget. Do you do that with your groups at all?
No, what I do is, and what I've done this year is say to them, you better not provide me something I have to cut this year. Last year, there was a lot of work I had to do to slim down budgets, and it still wasn't enough at the bottom.
Can't they do it before you get it?
They can, but I see the bigger picture, and sometimes that can be, in a large budget, a public works budget or an EMS budget, you have that, but cemetery budgets, sometimes you lose the forest for the trees, and those little amounts, as you may remember, those mowing amounts are spread up among 3 different budgets. And the increases in and of themselves aren't substantial, but as we talked about it last year, boy, there's gotta be a better way to do that if we look at it in
I
totality.
mean, somebody has responsibility for each one of those, no matter how
Yeah.
each there are.
Right,
I mean,
right,
In private business, typically, the way the boss goes to you and says, we're over too much in the budget, we're spending too much money. You know the business the best, each one of your departments. You tell me, how
Yeah.
you gonna reduce that number by 1%? They come to you, you may not agree with it, you may say, no, we're gonna spend more.
yeah,
But to get them to come up with a plan, they know the business.
they do.
Why don't we ask them to come up with the numbers and make them show you what they think is the critical thing and where they can save money and so forth?
Yeah, and I think with the 1% target, Bill, I think that's exactly what I would do. But what I would present you with would be my answer, not theirs. Does that make sense?
No, but I mean, they're gonna give you a number, right?
They're gonna give me a number,
And
right?
you're
But what I would, so let's have a fictitious, let's say it's cemeteries, right? So cemeteries, the department head of cemetery says, okay, and I get their budget and I say, okay, there's a 1% goal here. I want you to provide me with what that would mean to get to a 1% goal.
Use your imagination.
Right, exactly. Now, what you might see by the time I bring forward what that solution is, it'll be my solution, not necessarily theirs. But I'm gonna use their ingenuity and their know-how to support that. Does that make
It
sense?
does, but we don't care really about.
Probably not.
You're gonna make the final decision.
I'm gonna
What
make
you're
the
gonna
final
bring to us.
Exactly,
I'm just saying, the way you manage your people,
yeah,
let them, they're the experts, these are the areas, the public works, they know what they're doing.
absolutely. No,
Let
I
them and say, look, we
agree
only
with
have this
that.
much money to spend, you come up with what the priorities are.
Yeah.
And come back to me. And
Absolutely.
then you're gonna give us what you think.
That's exactly
But
right.
we're just asking about your style and how you
Yeah.
establish budgets for these departments, that's all.
Well, we start with meeting existing conditions, and we work from there. and then we work off of that. Now, what we haven't had is we haven't had the target that you all provided. That's a new
But I mean, they're making those
aspect.
decisions, not you, John. When they come to you with the numbers they want for their department.
Initially.
Right.
Right.
So it's their ingenuity. They're the ones that are coming up with the ideas.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying, you need 3 trucks, not 4, or 2 trucks, not 3. That's coming from
They're
them,
gonna justify why they need it.
100%.
It's another way to maybe, again, put more of the responsibility on people who really know what they're doing in their jobs. And it's amazing sometimes how they come up with some creative ideas and how they can cut some costs.
No, I appreciate
You know,
that.
you can save
Yeah.
costs on cemetery mowing, just don't do it as much. And I
I
guess
got a
I'm,
plot over there.
but I'm making a point, yeah.
We'll make sure yours is mowed.
I am making a point, though,
Mow my own.
yeah,
Mow your own, that's right.
or put down some AstroTurf. But I guess one of the questions, and I'm not defending or advocating one thing or another, when you look at private, you've still got business objectives to meet in terms of revenue and profit and all that kind of thing. In the municipal side of things, you don't have that same driver if you say cut cost and you cut service. And that's a question, but I agree 100% with getting the department managers to buy in and own, if you will, their budgets. I've had a conversation with a few of them over the past, few weeks. And you'd ask, are you responsible for the budget? And the first person I talked to said, of course I am. And we sat down actually on a real functional level, trying to decide on how to buy something that particular department needed, but how to do it in the most cost-effective manner. So I have a firm sense that they do care. They do. He does a rotten job at explaining to us that they do.
And
Thanks, Bill.
I don't disagree with it.
And I say that in jest. You know what I'm saying.
I don't disagree with anything what you're saying, but
So-
what I'm just saying is,
Yeah.
John says to the head of the Public Works,
Yeah,
the town doesn't want these costs again to show up these huge increases.
yeah.
I want you to go back.
Figure out how to
and
do
tell me,
it.
okay, if you could have 1% less than you had last year, you come up with your priorities and figure out how we can get, again, great service, but meet that number and come up to John and say, here's how we can do it.
I don't disagree, and that, one of the things I asked Clay to put on the agenda was a discussion of KPIs, or key performance indicators, on a department level basis, where you look at, because right now we've got sections for KPIs in the budget itself. The mathematical one is a very generic one, that's just put in each department. But there aren't economic KPIs in all the departments, and obviously not all departments would warrant them, but there are certainly some that could, and whether, like this vehicle optimization issue of, that's a KPI, you could say, put in that public works budget. But, what's your, I don't know what the KPI reads like, that's something that we'd probably have to discuss internally a little bit in terms of help them out, because he doesn't need to spend the next 2 months figuring that out, he's got other problems, but the concept of putting KPIs in some of these department level budgets that we think would be an appropriate measure of whether or not we can say economically it was successful. You have to meet the scope, but you need to do it for less. That, I think, culturally, moving that deeper into the departments would probably be a good thing.
Sure.
But you do run the danger of them saying, I'll just cut the grass half as much. And I'm being facetious, but
John wouldn't let that happen.
I would
not to your plot
We
anyway.
gotta mow Bill's plot.
I know.
He wouldn't let that happen.
I think we're gonna use some of that AstroTurf they were gonna use. out of
That's it, there you
this.
go.
But at any event, that was part of the discussion that I asked Clay to put together is, it doesn't necessarily affect this year's budgeting process, but it affects how they look at the budget over the year. And at the end of the year, you kind of come back and you say, all right, how did we do against some of these measures? And I'm not suggesting we have 15 KPIs per department, it's more like 3 or 4, something like that, fairly simply.
What is KPI?
Key performance indicator.
Yeah.
So, sorry, it's an old management blah, blah.
And then you have a review.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to be complicated. I mean, I'm just saying, that it also forces people, I remember when I got my first business unit thrown at me back in the 1980s, it was like, what am I doing? But somebody says, well, you better have this many bookings and efficiency and da-da-da-da-da, it sort of
But I think it helps the employees. I mean, they know
100%.
exactly what he's looking for.
I agree, but
They'll pay attention to it.
I think that if, though, as a group, we could help on the economic side for some of these departments to figure out what would we want to see. We talked about one right there was that vehicle efficiency issue, economic efficiency. There could be, there's gotta be others. And rather than make them, you know, try and figure out how to plow the roads and figure out about next year's KPIs, maybe we ought to give them a little help. It's just my thought
Sure.
on it.
They need to know what's important.
Yeah, and if you can articulate it into a goal that's meaningful, in other words, not just some sort of gobbledygook that, you know, is unachievable, it's gotta be something that's measurable and, you know, achievable, then, yeah, I think there's some value to it without making their lives too complicated. So, anyway,
Yeah, the only thing you're missing is a bonus if they hit their goal.
yeah, well, you wanna privatize this? There you go.
Missing was
Yeah,
probably
and also the goal of getting that binder down to a reasonable, like, when you said, this is, I shuddered for a minute when you said a few minutes ago, we're gonna go through this line by line, I was like, oh my God. But something like that, like each of those sections of the full budget book, I mean, it's just pages, and there's an overview, and then there's some indicators that are not particularly useful generally, and then there's budget, it's just a lot, and we've talked a little bit about, you know, burden on Megan to do this, and deal with all of us, and deal with you, and all the other stuff, and at some point, I was part of that process, it may be looking back at how the budget's constructed, and I've been spending a lot of time, as you'll read soon enough, looking at budgets in other towns, and, you know, there's different ways you can construct them, and I want to figure out a way that we can get the budget down to, that helps elevate things for the staff, but also helps elevate things for us, so we're literally not going line by line. But for each of those sections, it's like, these are the three big things. And this is part of, again, when we went back to this sort of key drivers, and we know that was an imperfect study, and we didn't know, you know, things in the old days were in different lines, it was hard to do.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things would be helpful in terms of helping the construction of the budget document, because it's a staggering amount of work. And I think we want to be sure that we have just as much as we need and not one line more, because there's better uses for her and her team than putting together a 500-page binder for us. So, and it may be as part of that process is how do we get clear on, like, these are the three things pieces of information we really need about cemeteries. It's this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So, that's a longer term, just as this is a little bit of a longer term piece, but,
That's great.
I do hope we come back to how the budget hearing process in March is constructed so that we can take some time to focus on those big picture things. And, you know, if the cemeteries are up X, great, let's move. And we can stay on top of the things that are the real issues.
Steve, I've been telling them they don't need to mow the cemeteries as much as they do for years, and they don't listen. And by state law, they only have to take care of the veterans.
It's his fault.
I have a question. So you mentioned that something came under budget for public works. So is there any part in the budget process in the past that we've discussed things that come under budget, or things that have gone substantially over budget? Is that brought to the light for the budget committee, or?
So we have a quarterly report that sort of looks at the status of where things are at that time. So we've got, the last one would have been the October, which would have been really too soon to see any of that. So probably the quarterly report that would, as of, you know, the January 1st, that second quarter, would probably be the best way to sort of reflect that. But honestly, by the time we're gonna be sitting down, we're gonna be having those conversations. As you know, it has the year-to-date, so it's the same numbers. So you're sort of having that conversation at the same time of new numbers and how you got
And that's
through
like
where
an
you were.
overall department number, right? But like
In the
individual-
quarterly, the quarterly
but
report.
like individual, like, hey, we had this capital improvement plan, but we came underneath the number, or we blew the
Yeah.
number, or, you know.
Yeah, I mean, those are,
I guess the reason I ask is learning from our
Yeah.
mistakes for when we're going through the new book of what questions kind of
right.
run in on.
That's a good question. I mean, obviously, we haven't gone over budget in the time I've been here. Last year was a bad, was a tight year. We had a lot of things that all came in, but we haven't come close to been a point where we're over budget in any way. Individual projects though, I mean, that's sort of what I was
That's where I'm
referring to.
going at, yeah.
Yeah. And I think what we're doing a better job of, and what we really hadn't been doing to that same degree of project-based budgeting for, a given road. So Annis Road, that's one where, okay, so we were over on that, but we were under what we were working on, Mirror Lake Road, so, we sort of, that's how we're working within that. Now, when you look at the budget line, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell, but as we're looking at, that individual road project, budget, that's where sort of that was coming in. The issue that we were seeing was in terms of why we changed sort of tact in last year's, or this existing year's budget, what we're working in, was because we were seeing that, and even though we weren't tracking it as such, it was clear that, we expected 3 culverts and we put in 8. Okay, well, what are we doing wrong here? Why are we missing that when we're putting together the budget? And so that was just a much more exhaustive effort last year to do that. Now, the culvert numbers aren't changing, but it's really just material is really where we've seen that savings and recognizing that.
Are we on F on our agenda?
Yeah, I think technically we're still just finishing up A, but we've kind of danced around to all of the other
We've gone
ones.
through except F
Go on.
was the, right?
Say it again.
I think we've gone through everything except F on our agenda. This is the last item, right?
Yeah, I just don't know if we want to, as we're going through these, establish any specific KPIs. If that's what we want to.
I think the question is what's the best way to go about that? And I think probably that's a homework sort of thing.
Yeah,
If we can,
Tonight here.
right.
I mean,
Yeah,
we have one meeting to go before the onslaught, right?
right. We should have our February meeting, which, just throwing out there, should be on, if we're following the same first Tuesday every month, February 3rd. Just so everyone knows, February 3rd, I think is what we'll plan for. And then hopefully at that time, we can also approve minutes. But I think, even going up to discussion topic B right now, the items that the budget committee would like to see included in the budget document, are there any other, so I know we've talked with John already a lot so far tonight, but are there any other items that we want, to see him put include any specific things? Any specific graphs, any specific KPIs in this coming budget cycle, budget document that we want to see? I think now, on the front of it is probably the time to do it, time to recommend them.
I recommend you put 4 blank lines in the KPI section, we'll tell you what they are.
Put 'em in here.
Room for future expansion.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just think it'd be good we have talked about a few things that, numbers, not, I distinguish between a KPI, the key word being operative. You don't want too many keys, but there are other metrics and whatnot that could be useful, when reviewing things that we've talked about. So again, I don't think this is something to discuss here and now, but before the next meeting, I would just would say as a reminder, if we have anything, it'd be probably nice to at least compile a list, and maybe Megan can include them, maybe not, but that's just sort of a last call, I suppose.
Yeah, and I don't know how much work, I mean, you talked before about how, the cemetery stuff and other pieces get sprinkled through the whole budget, and it does seem to me that in that binder someplace, you pull some of that together, but it might be worth looking again for her, with the expertise to look at it again and make sure we've got those sort of grouped in the right way that are not scattered across.
When
And
you say that, we're actually gonna do some reorganization.
Okay.
I don't know if it's gonna totally.
No, that's fine.
but
Yeah, that's
We're
fine.
gonna do some of that.
Okay,
Yeah.
the other piece is, as we said before, that the challenge with doing the longitudinal stuff, looking lengthwise, is things that appear in the budget. You know, we talked earlier about the planning department, right? So that number goes up, but there is a contract that dropped off.
Right.
And those aren't offsetting lines, and so, I mean, it's in there if you can find it, but it's
Right.
it's not easy to see necessarily. So again, the challenge of doing this line by line is there's a lot of those, and what we try to do with this little analysis we did is let's just focus only on the things that are like $10,000, or, you know, we tried to
Yeah,
do a
whatever.
cutoff.
Yeah.
And it would be helpful to have those, for those big dollar, big ticket items, to have that, okay, this is why this went up, this is the contract that dropped off, the EMS contract dropped off, and this went this way. So I think that's just, as we're looking for trend lines, it's not always, the one-to-one just isn't there because of the way the budget's constructed. So I'll leave that, I know she'll take care of it, I'm not worried about it, but that makes it challenging to be going, okay, wait,
Yeah.
you know,
No, and let me, I'll just say this, I mean, there's a period of time when the budget is there and it works for who was ever here at that time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. Our friends to the south in Rockland have a budget format that's relatively similar to what we have here. But there's comes a time when the needs change, and as the groups, board and budget committee who have to look at these things, we sometimes have to change our views and change how we get to the end point, because the end point is the end of the process, right? The point isn't to make it as difficult for everyone as possible. It's to get through and understand what the policies are we're trying to accomplish, and so everyone understands it. So hopefully, you know, we'll work towards that, and I think we've got some good ideas already here, so.
Good.
I'm
So
excited.
we're now on F.
I think now we're on F.
He's on it.
I think now I'm gonna
Exactly.
put Walker on the
Anything else?
pedestal.
I did prepare some pages, right down to the wire. I don't have copies for everyone, but, and so I was, as you saw, was assembling them at the beginning, but no stapler. Apologies.
Something about a stapler? Did you say something?
I will call it a problem.
Just fold
I
the
will
corner
count the
over.
staples
Yeah,
out of that.
It's a lot of pages, don't worry, I'll try to be brief and you can read through
Thank
if you
you.
want, but, it's,
Don't just try to be good.
Thanks, sir.
We can share. In the back. If anyone wants to look over my shoulder, feel free.
This is just my summary following our last meeting, which was on December 17th, very Christmassy meeting. You know, the executive summary, the first bullet is mine, of course. You know, the spending on health insurance seems high when you look across other municipalities, just at, you know, sort of the 10,000 feet level. Question is that true, and if so, why? The task force, Megan prepared a great memo with some good benchmarks in it for sort of what the contributions are around the state of Maine. We currently cover 90% of healthcare premiums, which is not, you know, which is pretty much in line with, you know, a lot of benchmarks. And there's more information down below. But a lot of the plans in the state do more of a split where they will cover 100% of a single, like the basic single plan, and then a much lower percentage of the difference to a family plan or a premium plan. And I'll come back to that. We do use Maine Municipal Health Trust, which seems like it's probably the best option. Mainly, you know, going to the private market, really the only reason you'd want to do that, I think, is to get more plan options, and that would be a desirable thing, all else equal, because the plan options from Maine Municipal are very limited and all very similar in both price and coverage, which is the biggest disappointment, I'd say, of this thing for me. And is ultimately going to make it very difficult to save anything meaningfully without, you know, reducing benefits, which I can say it was strongly opposed by the task force comprised primarily of town staff, naturally. Yes, no, so I'm sure we're all shocked about that. Rockport offers lowest and the highest plan of that main municipal offers, interestingly, and the spread between them is really not significant. The one really interesting thing to me that came out, coming onto why does Rockport's spending seem so high is we currently budget pretty conservatively. So there were 9 unfilled roles in the fiscal 26 budget that are budgeted as family plans, like basically the most expensive option, which is the conservative approach because, you want to make sure you have the cash if people elect to do that. However, only about half of the employees today are in the family plan and half are in single. And so that actually could be $150,000 of like delta between what the actual is to what it's budgeted as. And you take that out and Rockport spending does come much more in line with, still high, but more in line with what you'd expect looking at the other municipalities. I'll skip over the task force. I think we already know, but there's the list of people on it, mostly town staff. Rockport's current position, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on any of this, but you can see, so why was I thinking, in March that this seems like a lot of money? It's because when you do the math, Rockport seems to spend about $3,000 per employee, which is about 50% more than sort of national averages and Maine averages.
Is it spend or budget?
That's budgeted, but yeah, spending would still be, about, even Camden's budget is, I think, 27.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
I was just
yeah, it's a good
making a
question.
distinction.
Yep.
What is the main reason again why Rockport is so high?
Well, so that's, part of it's the budgeting thing. Part of it is that, if you go down to this regional municipal comparison, which you may have already jumped to, we're 36% of payroll. There's a lot of, and I put these caveats in here. This calculation's mine. It's simplistic. It's just wages and healthcare spending, just to try to find some way of comparing across. And certainly I would discount things like Lincolnville, which, are not particularly instructive in this. But Rockland and Camden, in that sort of mid to high 20% range, seems like a more reasonable target. To me, trying to figure out why that is, I think the Rockport, if you budget sort of more realistically and not conservatively, so that you're using sort of, not everybody's on a family plan, that probably comes down to 33%-ish, which is a lot better, like I said. But then beyond that, it's, I think, mostly composition and what plans people are selecting. Because we know Camden's using Maine Municipal. They have the same plan offerings. Rockland, most of these municipalities have the same offerings. So they're not getting better deals, I don't think, on premiums from anywhere else. But it's just how their employees electing healthcare. It could be that we have more full-time people as relative to part-time people at other municipalities. It could be.
Well,
that,
yeah,
yes.
that was a question I had. I see the number of 35 employees currently enrolled. How many employees does Rockport have overall, and how many of those are full-time and how many of those are part-time?
I think it's 45 full-time. There's 45 people eligible, I think, for health insurance. Is that right? Right, John?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you have it down here, right? The employee enrollment distribution.
Yeah, there yeah, I've got 45 eligible. There's another 13, I think, part-time or seasonal, and some others.
So not everybody participates in our health care, which means they're probably getting their
covered by
insurance
their-
from somewhere else.
Yep,
Okay.
exactly right. As I gather, if your spouse works for the schools, you might be better off taking their plan. The question then becomes, well, what if anything can be done to save money? If you don't want, if you're not going to reduce, just the absolute amount that, if you're not going to make plans more expensive for employees or remove the option altogether, there's not a lot you can do. I was hoping before we started this, there would be like a cheaper plan that, would save both employees and the town a lot of money that you could offer, include, and really strongly incentivize it. And then, encourage people, if they don't need the best plan, why don't you put a few extra $100 in your paycheck every month and everybody saves money. You can still do that. That's what I have in this potential savings approaches, the three different scenarios that I've modeled, where you can basically adopt more of Camden's approach and cover 100% of the cheapest plan for a single person, and then the different scenarios are different coverages beyond that. So 84.3 would make it basically nobody's worse off because you're still, you know, if you want the premium family plan, the employee is still spending just as much money. But the only reason you would do that is because now you would save even more money. You know, you'd save, you know, instead of $20, you know, or instead of $60, you'd save $95, right, a month. Which is,
This is what the town's paying, or what the
this is what the employee is paying.
employee's paying? Okay.
So if, you know, basically you're just trying to, this employee savings to switch to Pemaquid Family is sort of trying to get that number to be more and more attractive to employees so that they opt into a cheaper plan. So scenario one would be nobody's worse off. Scenario two, you're making the family plan on the cheaper plan the same price, but that means people on the family plan would be spending a little bit more, $380 versus $331 in scenario three is the Camden model as I understand it, 100% of the base and 80% of the delta. And that, you know, you're doubling the incentives basically. So instead of, you know, saving $60 to switch, you'd save $120 to switch to the basic plan.
Couldn't people see that as discriminatory?
How?
Well, it seems to me that you're making the family pay more than the individual. And
Yes.
proportionally.
You would be, but that's, I think, standard practice across.
Okay, so
most
you're assuming that if a family plan, it's two people who have insurance, and then Rockport would be the backup to the primary? Or,
So if you, well, I think, you know, if your spouse is working and they have a plan, it's at your choice, right? Whose plan you want to put the family on or both of the people on. I think most employers, I'm sorry, I realized that there's some typos in here. I did use AI to prepare this, but I edited and reviewed it, mostly. I guess I think the responsibility of most employers is to insure their employee, and the benefit is you can also insure your family.
okay.
And that, I think, is what you'll find in the private sector and across, indeed, you know, you see every other municipality covers less of the difference to the increase to the family plan than Rockport covers.
Walker, is there more gonna go on? This says update on the report. Is there more meetings gonna be?
We have one meeting planned for January 20th, and the goal is to try and, you know, any recommendations that we want to make before the budget year to get them in, you know, before that year. In this year's budget, you know, there's very little prospect for saving, you know, much of any money at all, since this wouldn't even take effect. Any changes to the plan offerings wouldn't take effect until halfway through the fiscal 27 budget year. So you can multiply by half any potential savings. There are a couple other things that I want to talk about. This document is certainly not complete and exhaustive, despite its length. But, you know, things other private sector employees and public sector employees do, different policies we can talk about. There's, you know, we've talked a little bit about what if you do reduce the, you know, the amount that Rockport covers, but you make up for it in a, you know, one-time wage increase or something to make everybody, you know, these are things that we are going to talk about, but are, you know, a little untraditional perhaps. I think the good news, the bad news for, you know, me wanting to find a brilliant savings, but the good news for actually saving money is that the actual spending on healthcare is probably quite a bit lower, you know, significantly lower than the budgeted number just because of that, the conservative budgeting figure. And Megan was talking about creating a reserve fund for healthcare, which I think could be a really good idea because you don't know what plans people are going to opt into. So it does probably make sense to keep, you know, some of that, let it, you know, in a private company, you wouldn't have to budget everything you need. You would just, you know, find it in your cash balance. So I think that it probably makes sense and could let us, you know, bring the budgeted figures down a little bit. So I would, you know, I think in a private company, you would budget, if you have 10 open roles and you know that half of your employees today are on family plans and half are singles, you'd probably budget the same split. But that's the update. Sorry, not quite as short as I wanted, but.
We were looking for the magic.
I know, I was too.
You're not delivering here.
I know, it's very disappointing.
So Maine Municipal Employees Health Trust doesn't really provide, there's not like a health savings account model
There-
or any kind of creative
all
That
the,
would put more money in the pockets of employees,
right,
potentially.
no. All the plans are very, very similar. It's, and I think that's one outcome from this task force could be to just ask maybe municipal health, have you considered expanding your options? You know, because we basically, I was really surprised that the highest deductible plan offered is $2,500, which, you know, while it might seem like a high deductible, I mean, mine's $7,500, and that's still not a high deductible health plan. So, and that's how you have cheaper health care. So, but, you know, I think if you went to the private sector, you know, you could find more options, but Rockport's such a small employer, you're not going to get advantageous rates versus, you know, being in the pool with all municipal employees. And, you know, you also, I think, frankly, I don't think that these plans are really nice. You know, as I've said to somebody, I don't think this is bronze, silver, gold. It's, you know, 12 karat gold, 16, 24 karat gold. Yeah, these are all really nice plans.
yeah.
And I think you'd be unlikely to even to find them offered in a lot of private employers. I know mine's certainly not as well.
So all of the towns on this list use MMAs.
I can't speak for this list. I think probably so. There's 10,000 employees in MMA, which I can't imagine excludes an awful lot of the municipal employees in the state of Maine. But
The only thing I would just add, and Walker mentioned it here as a bullet, the one thing that and I haven't done any more work on this, we talked on the 17th about this, but that question of percentage of payroll, and I think it's an important number. My sense is that we just have more full-timers. I know you mentioned that, but I just want to reiterate that as comparatively to, say, a city of Rockland, or I don't think there's in terms of the characteristic of the overall workforce that we have, I would bet we have a higher percentage of full-time, year-round employees as compared to a city of Rockland who has camp staff and, you know, people who do, you know, things specifically with very seasonal needs. We don't necessarily have that.
Yeah, Canvas Parks Department is seasonal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it's sort of but I mean, it doesn't discount the rest of the work. It's something that made me, when we were talking about, like, wow, I'm surprised that number stands out. So
it's just a flag, you know,
It's
to try and
interesting
figure
to
out
know.
some way of comparing things. And, you know,
For
I
sure.
think it was very surprising to me, even, you know, knowing all of the seasonality and everything that you just said, that Camden would spend less than us. But I think that probably is more of a conservative budgeting thing, and maybe Camden just have fewer unfilled positions or whatever,
Absolutely.
right? So,
Yep.
but,
That also contributed, though, to the portion that the town is paying? Because in here you said that Rockport's paying for the individual, the employee,
Yep.
a high percentage, and the full family is a high percentage, as a matching, right?
right, yes, yeah, it's 90% across the board.
Did that change at a particular year? Where we are?
There was was that part of that review?
Yeah,
2022?
part of the salary and benefits review 3-4 years ago. But I would say that the percentages, just as the percentages here indicate, that the percentages that the town covers and the percentages town coverage of the employee versus family or single are all in line with what other municipalities are doing, both regionally and across the state. So that was part of that larger effort, and so, and part of the conversation at that time, so.
So the percent we cover matches Rockland, Camden, what they cover for a family and.
Within
It's-
shouting distance of each
It's
other.
pretty similar, as Megan, as the document said, that isn't here, but it does, I do have a table that gets to it, this contribution structure analysis
Yeah.
lays out, you do, Rockport's version sort of works out to be, for a single plan for one person, works out to be pretty similar. What it doesn't, what I don't like about it is it doesn't have as strong of the incentives to, both to choose a cheaper plan, the more basic plan, or, you know, a lot of our employees probably do have spouses that are offered health care.
Right.
I don't think Rockport's taxpayers should be like paying for, you know, spouses who have good health care from their employer, per se. So, you know, I'm all for encouraging Rockport town employees, not to insure their spouse in Rockport if they have a good other option. You know, certainly it's a benefit that we offer, and, you know, nobody's saying we shouldn't, but I do think creating stronger incentives, and that's what those, you know, 100% of the base, 75 or 80% of, you know, the difference does. You know, it discourages choosing the family plan if you have a better option elsewhere, you know.
What's the incentive for them to select Rockport still when they have a spouse that's working with a better contract?
Well, if you've got a zero deductible plan that you only have to pay, you know, $330 a month for, but your, you know, your spouse is me and I have a $7,500 deductible plan that I pay about the same amount for.
Yeah, you'll never find it in private industry. Nowhere near this good.
No, mine is nowhere near, no.
Well, we have about 9 vacant spots.
You're hired, Bill. You're hired.
We need
We're
somebody
looking
to
for
mow that
mowing.
cemetery.
We're mowing cemeteries. Come on down.
Thank goodness for Medicare.
It did, the other, last thing I'll say is it did remind me, you know, when we are considering doing these cost-benefit analyses of, you know, is it better to insource or outsource? It's very important not to only look at the salary, right? You know, there's basically a fixed $30,000 cost of, you know, healthcare benefits for every employee that's full-time, so it's a big, big thing. Anyway.
Thank you
on
very
that
much for
exciting note-
putting the time to put that together for us.
Sorry about the
With some
staples.
assistance for AI. Yeah,
It's
we'll
all right.
work on staples for next meeting.
AI did not provide the staples.
I had one more question for John.
Yeah,
So last meeting, we followed a motion for Clay to talk at the next select board meeting
yep.
to bring up.
Yeah, so there's two motions also that we brought up. One of them is to recommend to them that our vote shows up on the ballot. And then the other motion was that we, send them the changes, potential changes to the charter and see if they will get those charter changes on the ballot.
So
And I have
basically-
not done that yet,
So
basically.
basically, my question for John, because we all might not be at that select board meeting, we're basically asking them to discuss it and vote on it, is to get your viewpoint on our motion.
Well, this is the first time I'm hearing about it, so forgive me for not having a
Yeah.
whole bunch of.
Nope, so
You
what
wanna
are-
talk some more about it if I
Yep,
could
so-
just to react? I don't.
So one of our motions was
Yeah.
the draft charter changes, which I think we've kind of had a back and forth about that.
Okay.
And I can send you what Steve and Helen came up with for draft charter changes, but
Gotcha.
most of it would be to show on the, some of it would be to show on the ballot
Yep.
the budget committee's actual vote. So the verbiage for recommendation, the word recommendation is what I think is open to interpretation. So some of that is, this verbiage is gonna be to show an actual vote,
Yep.
a thumbs up, a thumbs down, on however the budget format is laid out, whether it's all expenditures, all revenue, or if it was broke down by department, like it's been done a couple different times previously as well. And then some of the other charter changes, basically make it, try to encourage it so that the budget committee is still a group that is working parallel with you and the select board and is not necessarily a branch of the select board or whatnot.
Do you have the final motions that did we review each one of those motions at the last meeting? Each specific language?
No, we haven't, no.
There's the,
The changes
there's one
basically
motion and then the
restore
other one.
the language as it was in the charter before 2023,
Okay.
but keeps the change that was made around the minimum.
The minimum people. So you can
Yeah,
still
so you
operate.
could still operate. So we kept
Okay.
that piece from the change.
Okay.
But restored the language that made it very clear that the budget committee was a separate entity elected and had a separate set of responsibilities.
Yep.
Was not answerable to the select board and,
Right.
you know, so it was,
Yeah.
it was restoring that language, but trying to speak to the need that we were told was driving that
Yeah.
change in 2023, which was
Okay.
that you didn't have enough people to be a functioning
Yeah.
board. And that held up the process,
Yeah, okay.
but we'll send it to you.
So Clay,
Okay,
do we
yeah.
do we have the final language?
Oh,
He just needs to see it.
No,
before we
I don't
talk
have it
about
right in front of me.
But
What
me,
they-
our group, did we review the final language?
Yes,
We did.
yeah.
You're talking of Steve's actual language of the charter,
I guess we did look at it.
draft charter
Yeah.
changes, you're saying?
Okay, yeah.
Or you're talking the language of the motion?
Both. Yeah. Well, I mean, both, but I mean, you have the motion.
Yeah, and then, we went over what the actual changes that Steve and or Helen came up with.
And you actually made the motion, and I seconded it, to take those
Change, okay.
to the select board.
Yeah. And then the other motion, that was by Craig and Jeff seconded, was to draft a letter to request that the budget committee's vote be on this year's budget.
Because the
Budget.
charter wouldn't take effect. If the charter was moved forward, it wouldn't take effect
Oh, I
in time
see
for
what you're
this
saying.
coming budget
Because
that you're
it'd
gonna
be
bring to us.
June and then
Right,
it'd be
yeah,
before,
yeah.
and-
So
okay.
you'd be asking the select board to put on the warrant that we would take an up or down vote after the select board has finalized their budget.
Okay,
We would have one more swing, like just the process as it was before.
okay,
So we would be able to say our recommendation up or down, that would go on the warrant.
Okay.
The charter would make that, the charter language
Okay.
change would make that change. But that
Okay.
wouldn't take effect because the charter wouldn't take effect in time for the budget.
got it, okay. All right. Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sending it over, and
Yep.
I probably would, send it to town attorney too, to have them look at it as
Sure.
well.
So I guess to
Yeah.
get back to what Craig was saying, are your thoughts, at some point along the process?
Yeah.
Previous ballot, the budget committee's vote was actually on, the ballot for each
Yep.
section relative to the budget.
Right,
Are you thinking, do you feel that that's a good, display of what the budget committee is thinking to show it on the town ballot? Or is there implications from that that are different than how?
Well, I don't know. What I do like about the new format is it talks about what the give and take between the groups. And I like that. It might be a too inside baseball for the general public who are looking at a ballot and saying, well, what is $500 from whatever? But I do like the fact that it shows that these are two groups who are working together to either make changes or not make changes or what have you. So I like that aspect of what's on the current ballot in the current format. I can see
By that,
the-
you're referring to like the recommendations that show up on the ballot?
yeah, like, so that, yeah, because
the
it,
budget committee
it's,
made.
right, it's actually
board.
showing that the two groups are engaged in a process to try to get a better budget for the community. And then the resident or the voter can say, I agree with what the budget committee did and why the select board do that, they're crazy, or vice versa. And then they can make judgments from that, because sometimes they don't have all the information as they just look at the list of, the various departments. So, in terms of the relative value of the up or down, I've seen it both ways. I think, some people like to have that sort of finality of what this decision is. I think that there's, I don't know that I'm probably the one to say whether it's good or bad or different. I think the biggest thing is, honestly, I shouldn't have done that, sorry, Jeff. The one thing that I would say that I think is important is the dialogue about why the budget is what it is. And I think some of the conversations we're having right now about what was in those years when some of you weren't on the group, that wasn't as public and it wasn't as present in the overall town's conversation. And perhaps we would be having an easier time now if we had, or maybe not, I don't know. But the lack of that broader conversation as a community about what we're doing or what we aren't doing has been somewhat absent. And I think that's a problem for us. I think as a town government, we want people to know what's in our budget and what's going on and what's good and what's bad. So, in terms of the charter change, I mean, I would love to think we could not have to change the charter to do, for that, the voice of the budget committee to be heard and the voice of the select board to be heard and let the citizens decide. You know, I'll take a look at what we've got, and I think it's in the same way as what we're talking about with the budget book. If we've changed as a community and we need a different answer, or we need different information, then we have to adjust and slide with that. And I think that's what we're talking about tonight, and I think what I've heard from, you know, conversations you all have had, is that we have to slide and work with where our community is and what they need to hear. And sometimes it's different priorities, but sometimes it's presentation. It's about talking about things so everyone understands what's at stake. So, let me take a look. I'll see what we got. I'll run it before the department, before the town attorney, and see what needs to happen and go forward. But I think, certainly, and it's been said before, there was never any intent, though it came out this way, there was never any intent to minimize the role of the budget committee in any of that. It was really to deal with a particular problem that existed at a time. If there's other issues that arose, so be it. But I think this group has shown it's gotten more done in the last 6 to 9 months of any budget committee that's happened in the town of Rockport in the last 5, 6, maybe beyond years. So those charter changes ultimately, they didn't do, if that was the intent, they failed, but there was no intent. And I think what we have now is what in the totality of the work that you guys have completed at the point, is really saying, this is what we need, this is what we see, this is where we're moving as a community, and asking for staff, board, our community to sort of slide with that. And I think that's easy to do, and it's something that collectively, as all of us who have different parts of this budget process, I think we want a better result in the end. So I think, I don't know exactly what the words are, but I think trying to work together to get there is something we all should be shooting for, so.
Kelly? I've been on this budget committee for, 12, 15 years, I'm not sure how long. Back when we had town meetings in person, there were always questions, people standing up, why is this way, why is that way? And the budget committee would come up and say, this is why we disagreed with the select board. Select board would come back and say, well, this is what and so there was a conversation going on. So we lost a lot when we went to doing it all by votes. The warrant articles now are so pushed together in groups that people don't understand that. I can't even give you an example, but we did go line by line.
Sure.
And I read the budget line by line.
Yeah.
And I was extremely offended when they changed the charter, taking away the saying, the voice of the budget committee. Maybe that's not what they intended, but that's what they did. And what Steve and I put back in, is our voice. And the people need to see that we have voted 5-4 in favor of this particular line item. And the select board voted however many of you there are. And 5. I don't want to say that the charter change was in response to a particularly vicious budget year, when the budget committee basically, except for 2 of us, I think, voted against everything. But it's important we get the wording back in the charter that took away the budget's voice. And frankly, I would like to see us doing public meetings again, or at least maybe have a public meeting ahead of the voting, so that people can hear, and they can ask the questions. And when we can explain, give us a voice.
Well, there is one. There is one, yeah, there is a public hearing before every every secret ballot has a public hearing, and there is an opportunity for that, because that is missing.
I've never seen a notice about that. Maybe I'm not looking in the
Yeah.
right place.
Every time, just as a matter of course, any secret ballot, every item that gets questioned by a secret ballot has to have a public hearing effectively to fill that void. That doesn't do the same thing as everyone upstairs in June, I like this and I don't like that. No, definitely not. But it's meant to, in state law, it's meant to provide that
Then
opportunity.
you need to make that very obvious with big bulletins all
Yeah.
over everybody and say, if you want to discuss the budget before we vote on it next Tuesday,
Sure.
come here, not on Monday, the day before, maybe the week before. And let everybody knows.
But John, is part of that public hearing part, is that sometimes part of a select board meeting?
Yeah.
When you have a issue come up?
Well, not necessarily a issue. It's
Well, I mean-
usually it's because it's not a separate night because no one shows up often.
And
Yeah.
to Helen's point.
Hey,
Yeah.
serve,
I mean,
serve
it's a whole
chili and
different-
we'll
when
all
you say it's
show
a
up.
pub- it's a public
Getting people to come is a separate
opportunity to
problem.
comment.
Yeah.
It's a whole lot different than showing all of the warrant issues at a town meeting and having lots of people there to talk about, ask questions.
Everything is on that list, but people don't necessarily identify it as that opportunity. I think and use that opportunity to, I like this, I don't like that, or whatever it might be.
Some of your
yeah.
select board meetings is, 5 people there.
Right, exactly.
That's supposedly a public hearing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not your fault, I'm just saying.
No, I know,
The
yeah,
opportunity
Yeah.
is not there to really ask questions about
right,
Yeah.
a whole group of people.
yeah.
Do it on a Saturday, serve,
Not on Saturday, no.
People have the
sometime when
opportunity to
people
come,
can
they should
come.
come. They don't wanna come, they're not gonna come.
Yeah, but I'm just saying the general way that we used to do at the town meeting.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody was there and you fed off of other people's comments. Somebody would ask a question, somebody over here would say a follow-up question, and you had a discussion about the warrant, and people
Yeah.
started thinking about what we were asked to vote.
And you could make changes. You couldn't
And there
increase
was-
anything, but you could decrease, and you could move things around.
And there was investment from the community.
Yeah.
It wasn't a budget that was being imposed on them. It was a budget that they had a actual role in.
They could actually
and
cut
saw
something.
themselves in
Yeah.
that role. I get that people don't come to town meetings, I get it. But that's a separate problem. If that's the problem, let's solve that problem. How do we get people to come to the meeting? Do
We
do
serve
chili?
cookies.
Do we do parties? Do we do the donut festival? Do we have a comedian? Let's figure, that's how we should have tackled that, is, hey, folks, we have some really big budget challenges ahead. We need the best minds. We need you to devote a night. Here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna have this and that. There's ways to solve that, but that's not the way we solved it.
We aren't gonna solve that tonight.
Nope.
No, but we need to be creative and open to new ways to get this community engaged in this process. And I'm glad to be part of the group here, but we still have a very hard sell out there with folks who have had enough. And we've got to figure out a way to have, them feel like this is their budget too.
I would like to add, as maybe the only person here who never was able to go to a town meeting, I arrived too late. Sounds interesting to me. I like the idea, and I do think to some extent, the medium is the message. If it's a select board meeting regularly scheduled, or even just a normal select board meeting, everybody in this room, I see some familiar faces from the public here. You don't need to be told to attend a meeting. Clearly, and thank you for coming. But most people would like to attend the big ones, and not every single one. And so I think if you host it upstairs, if you do something distinguishing, and you advertise it, I think you're going to get more than the people we see here coming. Even me, not on the budget committee, would have come.
It's because it's about 100-foot walk.
Yeah.
Is there consideration
Touche.
going back to the town meeting?
There's always that's their decision.
I mean, it's
There is,
community
just to talk to devil's advocate the conversation, you do have more people who weigh in. And there are communities who are actually moving the opposite way. Town of Hope was one who had a very raucous, I still have the scars for those meetings. And they likely are going to move towards a ballot because they feel as though that it's a better representation of the community. Now, I see all of the conversations you all are having, I've heard 100 different times, but do have to move and adjust with where the community is, and maybe it's a slide back now. I don't know.
Did that stop at COVID, or what was,
I
when
do
did
want to
we?
interject, because it does raise disability issues. I mean, the whole process has been very interesting, because they did a community-wide survey of whether we should stick with our in-person town meeting or go to a secret ballot. And I think they probably will go to a secret ballot, because the overwhelming number of people are like, I got kids, I gotta get them to soccer practice, I can't go to those meetings, which means I can't vote on our budget. And I've got a disability, I'm in a wheelchair, I never leave the house. I mean, it isn't like we did it to shut the public out. Now, maybe we can do something other than a select board meeting. I mean, I think the first year after we made the change, after the pandemic, we had a special meeting. And, it was posted. We wanted to have that dialogue still, even though there was gonna be a secret ballot on the budget. And nobody came to this special meeting that we set
heard
up
about
to
it.
have the discussion. Well, anyway, I mean, we can always do better with communication and all of that. So I'm not trying to, maybe it's time to try that again. Try a unique meeting that's to talk about the budget and have the give and take. So, anyway.
Appreciate it. Rick, do you have something to say real quick? Since you're here.
No, you do, because it will, you'll die of obscurity.
Come on down.
Go home, guys, I'm tired. You heard that, didn't you?
We're with you.
I just want to tell you that, thank you guys, and I just think as a voter for the town, the respect for you guys belongs on the ballot. You get the vote. Years that I've been here, the board said this, the budget said this. Doesn't mean the board's wrong, doesn't mean the budget committee's wrong. But the respect for you guys, every time you come in here, and if you don't get your thing on there, I think it's disrespectful, so.
Appreciate it. Okay. Any other discussion of items not on the agenda before we wrap up? Okay, with
I
that,
move we adjourn.
second. Okay,
It's past my bedtime.
yeah,
Everybody raise their hand.
yeah.
You don't need a vote to adjourn.
We'll put that in the charter too, Bill.